The night before my first day interning at a finance firm, my mother threw my sister's old uniform onto the table. Wear this. Don't embarrass this family by asking for more. The next morning, I arrived late, my sleeves stained the worn-out uniform, making everyone stare. The HR director looked me up and down and said, "Late, sloppy, unprofessional. Do you really think this place is meant for someone like you?" I lowered my eyes, not from shame, but because the elevator doors behind him were opening. A woman stepped out, looked at me, and said one sentence that left the entire room silent. "I'm genuinely grateful you're here. Now tell me something. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments. Let's see how far this community reaches." Quick heads up, some elements in this story are fictional, crafted for entertainment and deeper reflection. Names and settings are coincidental, but the lesson underneath, that one's all yours. The suit hung over the dining room chair like a verdict I hadn't been allowed to contest. Sleeves too long, shoulders too wide, 3 years of my sister's success woven into fabric that would never fit me. At 25, I stood in my family's dining room staring at my sister's old interview suit, already understanding this was sabotage dressed as frugality. Helena Brennan, my mother at 52, with perfectly styled hair that cost more than the suit she was offering me, laid the worn garment across the chair without meeting my eyes. The gesture looked casual. It wasn't. "It's still good," she said, smoothing invisible wrinkles from the fabric. "You just need to iron it." I held the jacket up to my shoulders. The sleeves dangled past my fingertips. The waist gaped wide enough to fit another person inside with me. "Mom, this is Chloe's suit. She's 4 inches taller than me, and you're lucky you have anything at all." Gregory Brennan, my father at 55 and graying at the temples, didn't lift his eyes from his phone. "Some people walk into interviews with nothing." I looked at my mother's Cartier watch catching the dining room light. At my father's Italian leather shoes lined up by the door. At the dining table that cost more than 6 months of my college tuition. "I could buy something that actually fits," I said quietly. "Just something simple from—" "With what money?" Helena's voice went cold in the way I'd learned to recognize as final. "You haven't worked in 3 months. You live under our roof. You eat our food." The unspoken addition hung in the air. "You owe us everything. You don't deserve new things every time life gets difficult." She continued, her gaze meeting mine for the first time. What I saw there wasn't poverty or even cruelty. It was calculation. The same expression she wore when arranging flowers for the Harringtons' charity dinner, or selecting which version of a story to tell at church. She wanted me to fail. The realization settled in my chest like swallowed glass. "The interview is at 8 tomorrow morning," I said. "Huh? Then you should start ironing," Helena replied and left the room. Gregory followed her without a word, still scrolling through his phone. I stood alone in the dining room of my childhood home in Forest Hills, Queens, holding a suit that had helped my sister land a position at a consulting firm 3 years ago, before she moved to Boston and stopped answering my calls. The fabric smelled faintly of her old perfume and mothballs. I carried it to my bedroom at midnight and spread it across my narrow bed. In the bathroom cabinet, I found my grandmother's old sewing tin with its rusted safety pins and broken measuring tape. I had no skill with alterations, but I had 8 hours and no choice. The pins slipped through my fingers. I folded the excess fabric at the shoulders and pinned it from the inside, trying to create the illusion of a proper fit. The waist needed taking in by at least 3 inches. I pinned that too, feeling the sharp points press against my palms. When I tried it on, the jacket pulled awkwardly across my back, where the pins held too tight. One of them opened as I moved, scratching a thin line across my ribs. I winced, but left it in place. On some level, I didn't want to examine too closely. I understood this was what they intended. To send me into the most important interview of my life, looking like I'd dressed in the dark from a donation bin. I didn't pray that night. I had learned years ago not to waste breath on requests no one intended to answer. I set my alarm for 6 and lay awake watching my ceiling until morning came. The Q train from Forest Hills was delayed. I exited at Fulton Street at 7:45, already calculating the 8-minute walk to Manhattan Financial Tower, and knowing I would arrive with no margin for error. Broadway was crowded with the early morning rush men and women in suits that actually fit them, moving with the confidence of people who belonged in buildings with their names on the lobby directory. I walked faster, feeling the safety pins dig into my side with each step. Then I saw her fall. The woman was maybe 50, dressed simply in a dark coat and low heels, carrying a leather document folder. She stumbled on an uneven section of sidewalk and the folder flew from her hands. Papers scattered across the concrete, sliding toward the gutter. I stopped. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to keep walking. I had 12 minutes to reach the financial tower. But I had never been good at walking past people who needed help, even when helping me had never been part of anyone else's plan. "Are you hurt?" I dropped to my knees on the sidewalk, gathering papers. "Let me help." The woman stood slowly, brushing dirt from her hands. She watched me collect her documents with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You'll be late," she said. It wasn't a question. I glanced at her face for the first time. Dark hair pulled back, simply no jewelry, an almost severe plainness that somehow made her more noticeable, not less. Her eyes were the kind that missed nothing. "It's fine." I lied, reaching for the last page near the curb. My sleeve dragged through a puddle of something dark and oily. The stain spread across the fabric like evidence of every careful plan going wrong. I handed her the documents. Our fingers brushed as she took them, and she looked at me with sudden intensity. Not gratitude, assessment. Like I was a problem she was solving in real time. "Thank you," she said slowly. Not many people would have stopped. I should have said something polite and kept moving. Instead, I stood frozen while she studied my face, the ill-fitting suit, the fresh stain darkening the sleeve, the safety pin I could feel, working loose against my ribs. "I have to go," I finally managed. She nodded but didn't move, still watching me with that strange analytical gaze. I didn't look back at the woman still standing on the sidewalk. I ran the ill-fitting suit pulling at my shoulders with every stride, the fresh stain dark against the worn fabric, and checked my phone, 7:52. 8 minutes to cross 4 blocks and arrive at the most important morning of my life, wearing proof of everything my parents believed I deserved. I made it through the lobby at 8:13 and found the orientation room on the 24th floor at 8:15. Breathing hard, visible sweat at my temples, the stain on my sleeve dark and obvious under fluorescent light. My name was called before I reached the door. "Miss Brennan." The voice cut across 30 silent interns with the precision of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. Vincent Reynolds, 42 and sharp-suited in navy wool that actually fit, stood center room with his arms crossed and a folder in his left hand. "15 minutes late on day one," he said. "That's quite a statement." I froze in the doorway. 30 faces turned toward me. The room was arranged classroom-style desks in neat rows, every seat filled except one in the back corner. I recognized the silence immediately. It was the same kind that filled my family's dining room when my mother decided to correct me in front of guests. Everyone watching. No one intervening. "I'm sorry," I managed. "The train was delayed and I—" "The train?" Vincent's smile didn't reach his eyes. "How original." He walked toward me slowly and I saw the folder in his hand more clearly. Official company letterhead. My name already typed on a label affixed to the front. "The dress code specifies professional business attire." He continued gesturing at the suit hanging loose on my shoulders, the visible safety pins, the stain spreading across my sleeve. "This does not qualify." Someone in the third row coughed. Another intern looked down at their blank notebook. I stood in the doorway wearing my sister's suit and my parents' contempt, and understood with perfect clarity that Vincent Reynolds had been prepared for this moment before I ever walked through the door. The folder with my name, the suspension notice, because that's what this was. I could see it now in the way he held it. He had known I would arrive late, known I would look exactly like this. The setup was so thorough it could only mean one thing: someone had told him what to expect. "I have a suspension notice here," Vincent said, opening the folder so I could see the official form inside my name already filled in, waiting only for a signature. "Perhaps this internship isn't the right fit." He lifted his pen. The elevator at the far end of the room opened. The doors slid apart slowly, the way expensive machinery moves when it has no reason to hurry. A woman stepped out, and it took me 3 full seconds to recognize her. The woman from Broadway. But she looked nothing like the person who had stumbled on the sidewalk 40 minutes ago. Her hair was different, pulled back sharply instead of loose. She wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my parents' mortgage payment. Her presence filled the room the way authority does when it doesn't need to announce itself. Vincent's posture changed so fast it would have been funny if I wasn't still standing in the doorway holding my breath. "Ms. Chairman," he said, the pen disappearing from his hand like a magic trick. "We weren't expecting you on 24 today." "Chairman." My stomach dropped somewhere below the floor. "I came to clarify something," the woman said. Her voice was different too. Not unkind, but final. The kind of voice that didn't need to be loud to be heard. She looked directly at me, and I saw the same analytical assessment from the sidewalk, except now I understood what she had been measuring. "This intern," she continued, gesturing toward me without breaking eye contact with Vincent, "was late because she stopped to help me this morning when I fell on Broadway. She gave me her only clean towel. She made herself late to help a stranger. I am the only reason she is standing here now instead of sitting at a desk." The silence in the room changed texture, became the kind people hold when they're trying to understand what they're seeing. Vincent's face did something complicated. "Of course. Of course. My apologies, Ms. Chairman. I wasn't aware of the circumstances." "Now you are," she said. Her eyes moved to me for just a moment. There was no warmth in her expression, but there was something else. Recognition, maybe. Or calculation. The same look my mother wore when she was deciding which version of a story would serve her best. Then she turned and walked back to the elevator without another word. Vincent watched the doors close. The suspension notice disappeared into his jacket pocket like evidence no one would ask about later. When he turned back to face the room, his smile was fixed in place with visible effort. "Welcome to the program, Miss Brennan," he said. "Your desk is in the back corner. Everyone return to your orientation packets. We're already behind schedule." The 30 interns swiveled forward in their chairs with synchronized precision. I walked to my assigned desk on legs that didn't quite feel attached to my body, slid into the chair and stared at the orientation packet someone had placed on the surface. The words blurred together. I had just been saved by the chairman of the board of a corporation whose name was engraved on a golden plaque in the lobby downstairs. The woman I'd helped on the street. The stranger whose papers I'd gathered while my interview clock was running. It was impossible. It was too convenient. That was lucky. I looked up. The intern sitting one desk to my left was watching me with an easy smile. He was maybe 27, dark hair, the kind of face that looked friendly without trying. The kind of person who probably made friends everywhere he went. "She doesn't usually come down here," he added quietly, nodding toward the elevator where the chairman had vanished. "You must have made an impression." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. He smiled wider, like witnessing my rescue was the most natural thing in the world, and turned back to his packet. I stood still after she walked away, processing the impossible coincidence that the woman I'd helped on Broadway was the chairman of the board of a $1.4 billion corporation. The intern sitting near the elevator, whose name I didn't know yet, looked at me and smiled. I didn't know then that smile was worth $85,000. The morning's rescue bought me exactly 5 hours of normalcy before the other shoe dropped. At 2 o'clock, Vincent Reynolds called my name for the second time that day, this time with a smile that made the morning's suspension threat look like kindness. "Miss Brennan." He stood at the front of the office area where all 30 interns could hear. Given this morning's fortunate resolution, I have a special project for you. I looked up from the orientation materials I'd been pretending to read. Every other intern in the room had been assigned basic tasks, data entry report, formatting research assistants under senior analysts. I'd watched them receive their assignments one by one throughout the afternoon, each with a mentor's name attached. Vincent placed a thin folder on my desk. The label read, Project Riverside Risk Analysis Review. $47 million infrastructure development project. He said loud enough for the entire floor to hear. Full risk analysis, market volatility assessment, 3-week deadline. I opened the folder. 5 pages. No background documentation, no previous analysis, no context. Where are the supporting files? I asked. You'll need to build your own research base, Vincent said. His smile widened. No mentor assigned. If you're really as good as your profile says MIT graduate top of your finance program, you'll be able to handle it yourself. The statement hung in the air like a challenge issued in front of witnesses. I looked at the other interns. Most had turned back to their own work, but a few were watching with the careful neutrality of people who knew they were witnessing something that wasn't quite right but had no intention of getting involved. Julian Hayes, sitting 2 desks away, glanced at the folder on my desk. What field is the project in? He asked casually, as if making conversation. Infrastructure development and market volatility assessment, I answered. He nodded and smiled that easy smile again, then returned to his own work. The question had sounded friendly, but there was something about the precision of it, not asking about the deadline or the difficulty, but specifically about the field, that made me file it away in the part of my brain that had learned to track inconsistencies. Vincent walked away without another word. I sat alone at my desk with a 5-page folder and a project worth more than my parents' house. I had been taught my entire life to endure quietly, but endurance and documentation are not mutually exclusive. That night, I sat at the kitchen table in my apartment in Bushwick, a 5th-floor walk-up I shared with 2 roommates who worked night shifts and a radiator that only heated half the room. I opened my laptop and started searching. Project Riverside wasn't hard to find. It was public record filed with the City Planning Commission 3 years ago. Infrastructure development along the East River. $47 million in private and public funding. Risk analysis completed in 2021. I pulled up the original analysis report and started reading. It took me 40 minutes to find the flaw. The risk assessment had been based on 2021 market data, pre-inflation spike, pre-supply chain collapse, pre-interest rate corrections. Every single volatility metric was outdated by at least 18 months. The project had nearly been canceled because of it. I found the meeting minutes buried in a city planning archive. Board discusses significant concern regarding outdated risk analysis for Project Riverside. Motion to revisit pending updated assessment. The error wasn't subtle. It was the kind of mistake any competent analyst would catch within the first week of review. Which meant Vincent hadn't given me a challenging project. He'd given me a project designed to fail publicly. If I used the existing analysis as a baseline, which is what any new intern would logically do, I would build my entire assessment on corrupted data. And when I presented it in 3 weeks, I would be publicly wrong in front of everyone who mattered. I closed my laptop and sat in the dark kitchen for a long time. Then I stood up, put on my coat, and took the subway back to Manhattan. The office was silent at 11:30 at night, except for the hum of servers and the soft click of my desk drawer closing. Security had waved me through with barely a glance. Interns working late wasn't unusual during busy season, and I'd made sure to bring my laptop bag like I was just another ambitious new hire burning midnight oil. I sat at my desk in the empty office and pulled my old smartphone from my bag. I'd upgraded 6 months ago but kept the old one as a backup. The battery still held a charge. The microphone still worked. I opened the voice recording app, set it to continuous record, and disabled all notifications. Then I placed it in the back corner of my desk drawer, angled so the microphone faced my workspace. Not pointed at anyone else's desk, not hidden in a way that suggested I was spying, just placed in my own drawer, recording my own space. New York is a one-party consent state. As long as I'm part of any conversation being recorded, it's legal. I'd checked 3 different legal websites to be sure. The phone would run for approximately 72 hours before the battery died. I'd come back Friday night to swap it for my backup battery pack. I wasn't recording to spy. I was recording because I had learned something important about the world. When people decide to destroy you, they get careless about the details. They assume you won't fight back. They assume you'll accept what they say happened instead of having proof of what actually did. I had spent 25 years accepting other people's versions of reality. That ended this morning in an ill-fitting suit. I turned off the recording app notification, locked my desk drawer, and walked out of the empty office at midnight. The phone would record everything now, every conversation at my desk, every sound in my workspace. I didn't know when what I feared would happen, but I was used to preparing for the worst in silence. That's the only thing my family taught me to do well. The recording device ran silently in my desk drawer, while I learned to recognize the shape of surveillance dressed as friendship. By the third lunch, I noticed Julian Hayes never asked what I thought, only what I knew. Monday, he'd found me in the 12th floor cafeteria and asked if I minded company. I'd said no, grateful not to eat alone, while the other interns clustered in groups I hadn't been invited to join. We'd talked about the building, the commute, harmless first-week topics. Tuesday, he'd asked about my project. "How's the risk analysis coming?" He'd smiled over his sandwich, casual and warm. "Found any interesting patterns in the data yet?" I'd answered carefully. Mentioned I was still gathering baseline research. That the volatility metrics looked inconsistent, but I was working through why. Wednesday, he'd asked about my methodology. What databases I was using, whether I'd found historical comparison projects. I'd answered because not answering would have seemed paranoid, and I wasn't sure yet if I was being paranoid. Thursday, he'd referenced Tuesday's conversation with perfect accuracy. "You mentioned the volatility metrics looked off," he'd said, reaching for his water. "Did you figure out why?" I'd stared at him for 3 seconds too long. He hadn't written anything down Tuesday, hadn't pulled out his phone to take notes, but he'd remembered the exact phrase volatility metrics looked off in a conversation that had lasted maybe 2 minutes among 40 minutes of lunch small talk. "Still working on it," I'd said. Friday, I'd tested him. "What's your project about?" I'd asked. He'd waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, just standard market research. Pretty boring compared to yours. $47 million is serious responsibility." I'd never told him the project amount. Vincent had announced it to the intern pool, but Julian hadn't been at his desk when it happened. I'd checked. "How did you know it was 47 million?" I'd asked. He'd paused for just a fraction of a second. "Didn't you mention it Tuesday?" "No," I'd said quietly. "I didn't." "Must have heard it around the office then." He'd smiled that easy smile. You know how people talk. But I'd watched him all week. Julian Hayes never gossiped. Never joined the clusters of interns trading information by the coffee station. He asked questions and listened to answers and never ever wrote anything down. But he remembered everything. By Friday lunch, I'd counted 7 questions, each one specific. Each one cataloged somewhere I couldn't see. And when he'd referenced the volatility metrics from Tuesday's conversation on Thursday afternoon, I'd understood something important. He wasn't making conversation. He was gathering intelligence. There's a particular silence that fills a room when everyone knows something you're not supposed to know they know. I heard that silence Saturday evening at my parents' house in Forest Hills, sitting at the dining room table I'd grown up eating at, listening to my mother ask questions she had no reason to know to ask. "How is Mr. Reynolds treating you?" Helena had asked, passing the salad bowl with practiced grace. "I hope the project isn't too overwhelming." I'd set down my fork carefully. "You know his name. You mentioned it, didn't you?" She'd smiled. The same dismissive smile Julian had used about the $47 million. "No," I'd said. I didn't. Gregory had looked up from his plate. Don't be dramatic. You must have said something about your supervisor. My mother had never once asked about a coworker by name. A $47 million analysis is quite a responsibility for a first-week intern. Gregory had continued cutting his chicken with surgical precision. Most companies don't trust new hires with that level of project. I'd sat very still. I hadn't told them about the project. Not the amount. Not the responsibility. Not anything. It's unusual, Helena had agreed, unless someone sees particular potential or wants to test whether you're capable of handling pressure. The conversation had continued around me like a performance I was meant to witness but not interrupt. They'd known about the orientation, the late arrival, the stained suit. But they'd shown no surprise I'd kept the position. No questions about how I'd survived what should have been an automatic termination, because they'd known I would survive it, or they'd planned for me not to. The Harrington family would like to meet you next week. Helena had said over dessert, her voice carrying the same casual tone she'd used to mention a dentist appointment. I'd looked at her directly. Who? The Harringtons. She'd set down her coffee cup. We've mentioned them before. They're important business connections. They've been very patient. I had never heard that name in this house until tonight. But I'd seen it in my research. Harrington Capital. Major investor in Manhattan Financial. Board member connections. What kind of business, I'd asked. Gregory had answered. Family business. Partnerships that benefit everyone involved. It's important you make a good impression. The words had hung in the air like a contract I was expected to sign without reading. Helena had smiled. They have a son about your age. Very accomplished. You'll have a lot to talk about. And there it was. The shape of the plan I'd been trying to see since November 30th, when my mother had placed my sister's suit on the dining room chair and looked at me with calculation instead of poverty. The suit wasn't about making me look poor. It was about making me look unemployable. The late arrival wasn't bad luck. It was designed failure. They'd wanted me to lose the internship. To come home defeated with no prospects and no options. So I'd have no choice but to accept whatever arrangement they'd made with a family whose name I recognized from investor reports and whose debt my parents apparently owed. I'd eaten the rest of that dinner in silence, noting every impossible detail they knew, every careful word about the Harrington family. As I'd walked out the door at 9 o'clock, I'd thought of the name Harrington, a name I recognized from my research into the company's major investors connected to a debt I was just beginning to understand, and a plan I was only starting to see. Monday morning, I would give Julian his 8th question to answer. I spent Sunday researching the Harrington family and finding exactly what I expected: investment portfolios, board positions. The kind of wealth that purchases influence the way other people purchase groceries. By Monday morning, I understood the shape of the debt my parents owed. What I didn't understand yet was who in the building wanted to help me survive it. The brown envelope sat on my desk at 7:30 Friday morning like an answer to a question I hadn't yet learned to ask out loud. I'd arrived 30 minutes before the other interns, the way I'd been doing all week, checking my recording device and preparing for another day of Julian's careful questions. The office was empty except for the hum of computers on standby and the distant sound of the janitorial staff finishing their rounds. The envelope was plain brown paper, letter-sized, unsealed. No name, no sender. Centered perfectly on my desk like someone had measured the placement. I looked around the empty floor. The security cameras in the corners showed their steady red lights recording as always. Whoever left this had done it knowing they'd be on film or knowing how to avoid the angles. I opened the envelope. Inside were 47 pages of printed documents. I recognized the header on the first page immediately: Project Riverside Original Risk Analysis dated 3 years prior. Internal documents. The kind that required executive-level database access to retrieve. The kind that weren't supposed to leave secure servers. I spread the pages across my desk and started reading. It was the complete original analysis, the one that had nearly killed the project before it started. Every flawed assumption, every outdated data source, every error that Vincent had carefully not mentioned when he'd assigned me the work and handed me a 5-page folder with no background. And in the margins in pencil, someone had written notes. Not extensive commentary, just small, precise annotations. Next to a table citing 2021 inflation projections, pre-spike data obsolete. Next to a market volatility chart, source discontinued 2022. Current equivalent BLS database reference J-447. Next to a risk coefficient calculation, formula uses outdated constant, see Fed revision March 2023. I picked up the third page and held it closer to the light. The handwriting was small, controlled, the letters formed with the kind of precision that suggested someone who was used to writing things that mattered. I didn't recognize it, but I recognized what it meant. Someone in this building wanted me to succeed badly enough to risk their career leaving these documents on my desk. Not just the documents, the guidance, the exact breadcrumbs I needed to build an analysis that would be bulletproof. The person who wrote these notes understood the sabotage Vincent had built into my assignment and was actively trying to counter it. I photographed every page with my phone, including the margin notes, and saved them to an encrypted folder. Then I slid the originals back into the envelope and locked them in my desk drawer beneath a stack of orientation materials no one would look through. For the rest of Friday, I worked with the maps someone had drawn for me in pencil and waited to see if they'd reveal themselves. They didn't. By Monday night, I'd finished both versions. I sat at my kitchen table in Bushwick at 11 o'clock, my roommates already asleep, and reviewed my work in the blue light of my laptop screen. The real analysis was complete. 3 weeks of research compressed into 96 pages of data projections and risk assessment that corrected every flaw in the original. I'd used the anonymous documents as a foundation and built everything else from independent verification. Multiple sources for every claim, current data for every projection. The methodology was sound enough to survive any level of scrutiny. I saved it to a USB drive and put the drive in my jacket pocket. It wouldn't leave my person. Then I opened the version I'd been working on my company computer. It was identical. 96 pages, same structure, same data, same conclusions. Except for page 23. I was building 2 stories of the same event, one true, one false, and waiting to see which one someone would try to erase. On page 23, buried in a table of risk coefficients, I'd placed a single number, 0.784. It should have been 0.847, the corrected figure based on current Federal Reserve constants, but 0.784 was the old number. The 2022 figure, the exact error that had caused the original project failure. The change was invisible unless you knew what you were looking for. The formatting was identical. The decimal places matched. The table looked clean and professional. But anyone who cross-referenced my coefficient against current market data would find a discrepancy, a flaw, the kind of mistake that would justify pulling me into Vincent's office and accusing me of incompetence in front of witnesses. Except they'd have to access my computer to find it. They'd have to open my files, review my work without my knowledge, and in doing so, they'd leave traces, digital footprints, login timestamps, file access records. The beautiful thing about corporate surveillance is it cuts both ways. The same systems that let management monitor employees also create evidence of who accessed what and when. If someone wanted to sabotage my work to delete it, alter it, or just review it to report my failures to whoever was paying them, they'd have to leave proof they'd been there. I'd baited the trap with a single wrong number on page 23, subtle enough that casual review would miss it, obvious enough that forensic analysis would catch it, and specific enough that I'd know exactly what they found when they came to destroy me with it. I saved both versions at 11:47 Monday night. The real analysis stayed on the USB drive in my pocket. The poisoned version sat on my company computer where anyone with my login credentials could find it. If someone wanted to sabotage my work, they would have to access my computer, review my files, and in doing so, reveal exactly who they were. I had set the trap. Now I just had to wait and see who was desperate enough to spring it. The trap sat waiting on my company computer while I went through the motions of Tuesday afternoon work, checking my recording device during bathroom breaks, and watching Julian ask his careful questions to other interns as if he were simply friendly. The elevator doors were closing at 4 o'clock when Diana Ashford's hand stopped them, stepped inside, and pressed the button for the lobby without asking where I was going. We stood on opposite sides of the elevator car. The doors sealed shut. The descent from the 24th floor would take approximately 30 seconds. I counted the floors passing on the digital display above the door and waited. Diana didn't look at me, didn't acknowledge my presence beyond the hand that had stopped the doors from closing. We passed the 22nd floor in silence. The 21st. Then she spoke. Where was the error in the original analysis? See, not how is the project going? Not, do you need help? Not the kind of question a concerned executive asks an intern she rescued from suspension. A test question. The kind designed to reveal whether someone knows what they're talking about, or if they're repeating words they've memorized from someone else's work. I had 15 seconds before we reached the lobby. The risk coefficient was calculated using 2022 market volatility data, I said. The infrastructure development timeline shifted significantly in 2023 supply chain corrections, interest rate changes, revised municipal approval processes. The baseline assumptions were invalidated within 8 months of the original analysis. The error wasn't in the math. It was in using a snapshot from the wrong year to predict behavior in a fundamentally different market. Diana turned her head slightly. Not enough to look at me directly. Just enough that I could see her profile in the elevator's polished steel walls. She nodded once. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. Diana walked out without another word, her shoes clicking against marble as she turned left toward the executive wing entrance. I stood in the elevator for 3 seconds after she'd gone, my heart rate finally registering what my brain had understood immediately. I realized then Diana wasn't testing whether I'd done the work, she was testing whether I understood it. The anonymous documents had given me the map. But if I'd simply copied the analysis without comprehension, I wouldn't have been able to explain the error in my own words. Wouldn't have understood why the 2023 market shift mattered. Wouldn't have known the difference between a math mistake and a fundamental assumption failure. Diana had asked one question that required genuine understanding to answer correctly, which meant she knew about the documents someone had left on my desk, knew I'd received help, and was testing whether I was smart enough to use that help as a foundation instead of a crutch. The elevator doors started to close. I stepped out into the lobby and walked toward the subway, my jacket pocket heavy with the USB drive containing the real analysis, and my mind calculating angles I couldn't quite see yet. Julian texted me at 7:15 that evening. Coffee, same place. We'd met at the corner cafe on Park Row twice already this week. Monday night, he'd asked about my research methodology. Wednesday, he'd asked about my data sources. Each time, he'd memorized every answer I gave without writing a single word down. Tonight would be different. I arrived at 7:30. Julian was already there, sitting at the same table by the window, 2 coffees waiting. He smiled when I walked in, the same easy warmth he'd shown since December 1st. Long day, he asked. I sat down and wrapped my hands around the coffee cup. It was cold outside, December wind cutting through the financial district with the kind of persistence that made you forget what warmth felt like. They're all long, I said. We talked about nothing for 15 minutes. The weather, the other interns. Harmless observations about office politics that didn't matter. Then he shifted the way he always did to the question he'd actually come to ask. How's the timeline looking? He took a sip of coffee, casual. Still on track for the presentation. I'd spent 3 hours deciding exactly what to say, how to phrase it, how to make the lie believable enough to be reported, but false enough to expose whoever was listening. December 19th. I said, 3 weeks from when Vincent assigned it. Julian nodded. That's coming up fast. You must be feeling the pressure. I'm ready, I said. He didn't write December 19th down. He didn't need to. I watched his eyes for any flicker of confusion, any sign that he was trying to remember if I'd mentioned a date before, any indication that he might question whether the timeline made sense. But there was nothing. Just the same attentive focus he always showed, filing the information away in whatever mental catalog he maintained. The real presentation was scheduled for December 22nd, 3 days after the false date I'd just given him. Vincent had announced it at the Monday morning meeting in front of all the interns. Julian had been there. He'd heard the actual date, but he'd taken the December 19th timeline without question, without cross-referencing it against what he already knew, which meant he wasn't thinking critically about what I told him. He was just collecting it. We finished our coffees at 8:15. Julian talked about his weekend plans, something about visiting family in Connecticut, and I made appropriate sounds of interest while calculating the next 3 days in my head. If Julian reported the false December 19th date to whoever was paying him for information, they would prepare for a presentation that wouldn't happen. They would position themselves for sabotage on the wrong day. And when the 19th passed quietly with no board meeting, no presentation, no event at all, they would know I'd given them false intelligence. The question was what they'd do about it. I paid for both coffees at 8:15 and walked out into the December cold, turning left toward the subway while Julian turned right. He would remember December 19th perfectly, would report it to whoever was paying him to track my progress, and in 3 days, when nothing happened on the 19th, someone would realize I'd given false information. I would know the answer then. I just had to wait until Friday to see what they did with the lie. I didn't wait for Friday to come. While Julian's false December 19th date was being reported to whoever paid for his intelligence, I spent Wednesday lunch building a different kind of evidence. The 18th floor was nearly empty at 12:30 when I told no one where I was going and took the stairs instead of the elevator. The internal document library occupied the east wing, a quiet room with terminals for searching digital archives and locked cabinets containing physical records that predated the company's database migration. Most employees never came here. The two archivists who staffed the desk during business hours were at lunch. I sat at a terminal in the back corner and logged in with my employee credentials. The search function was straightforward: project name, date, range, personnel. I started with what I knew. Project Riverside, Vincent Reynolds. The search returned the current assignment, my assignment, and 3 historical references. I clicked the first. Project Harborview, October 2021. Infrastructure development. $62 million budget. Assigned to Sarah Mitchell, new hire, 2 months after her start date. Project manager, Vincent Reynolds. 3-week deadline. No mentor assigned. Final status canceled due to analyst failure to meet presentation standards. Termination paperwork signed by Vincent Reynolds dated November 15th, 2021. I opened the second result. Project Gateway, March 2023. Commercial development analysis, $51 million budget. Assigned to Marcus Holland, new hire, 6 weeks after his start date. Project manager, Vincent Reynolds. 3-week deadline. No mentor assigned. Final status canceled due to incomplete research and fundamental analytical errors. Termination paperwork signed by Vincent Reynolds dated April 8th, 2023. I sat very still in the empty archive room, my hands resting on the keyboard, and understood what I was looking at. 3 projects, 3 new employees, 3 failures, 3 signatures from Vincent Reynolds authorizing cancellation. The pattern was identical. Not similar. Identical. The same 3-week timeline, the same lack of mentorship, the same result: project canceled, employee terminated, Vincent Reynolds' name on the final paperwork declaring the work insufficient. This wasn't incompetence. It wasn't coincidence. It was a system. Vincent Reynolds had done this before. Successfully. Twice that I could find in the archives, and I was only searching back 3 years. There might be more if I looked further. which meant someone was paying him, or protecting him, or both. I pulled out my phone and photographed every page, the project summaries, the personnel assignments, the cancellation notices, the termination authorizations. Every piece of evidence that Vincent Reynolds had turned sabotaging new employees into a repeatable business practice. When I left the archives at 1:15, I had 43 photographs, and a question I couldn't answer yet. How much money changed hands every time Vincent successfully destroyed someone's career? The call came at 9 o'clock that night. I was sitting on my bed in Bushwick reviewing the archive photographs for the third time when my phone rang. Helena Brennan. Unusual for a Wednesday, she called Sundays after church, sometimes Fridays, if there was family business to discuss. Never midweek. I answered on the third ring. "How are you feeling, darling?" Her voice had that particular saccharine quality she used when she wanted something. "You've been working so hard. I worry you're not taking care of yourself." "I'm fine," I said. "The Harrington family is very eager to meet you next week," she continued, as if I'd expressed enthusiasm instead of neutral acknowledgement. "They're such lovely people, very patient given how long we've kept them waiting." I looked at the photograph on my screen, Vincent Reynolds' signature on Sarah Mitchell's termination notice dated 3 years ago. The same precise handwriting that had appeared on my impossible project assignment. "Do you know anyone in the HR department of my company?" I asked. 1 second of complete silence. Not confusion, not surprise. Calculation. The pause of someone deciding what to say instead of someone genuinely puzzled by a question. That 1 second lasted long enough for me to understand everything. "What are you saying?" Helena's voice shifted, lost. The sweetness went flat in the way it did when she was done pretending. "It's a simple question," I said. "Do you know anyone who works in HR at Manhattan Financial Tower?" "Why would I know anyone there? You just started. We don't know your coworkers." But she'd paused. She'd calculated. And in that 1 second of silence before her denial, she'd confirmed what I'd been assembling piece by piece since December 1st. "The Harrington meeting," she said, recovering her composure. "Tuesday evening next week, 7 o'clock. We'll send you the address. Wear something appropriate." "I have a work presentation that week," I said. "After your presentation, then," Helena replied smoothly. "This is important, Audrey, for the family, for your future. Don't make this difficult." She hung up before I could respond. I sat in my Bushwick apartment holding a phone that had just confirmed what I'd been assembling piece by piece since December 1st. My parents knew Vincent Reynolds. They were coordinating my sabotage from inside the company, and the Harrington family meeting next week wasn't a social introduction. It was the endgame they'd been engineering since the night they gave me Chloe's suit. I had 12 days until the December 22nd presentation. 12 days to understand how deep this went and who else was involved. But first I needed to know what happened to my sister 3 years ago. Chloe had worn that suit to her interview, had gotten the job, had worked there for 18 months before being fired for allegedly stealing funds from a client account, an accusation she'd denied that my parents had never defended her against, that had sent her to Boston to start over somewhere the scandal couldn't follow. The timeline had always felt wrong. The story had always felt incomplete. I pulled my laptop closer and opened my archived photos folder, scrolling back 3 years looking for anything from Chloe's brief time in New York before she'd disappeared to Boston and stopped answering my calls. That night, I would find a photograph I'd forgotten I had. I found it 20 minutes later in a box I'd barely glanced at since moving to Bushwick 3 years ago. The photograph was tucked between old birthday cards and a high school yearbook I'd never looked at, twice a snapshot someone had taken at Sunday dinner in April 2018. I recognized the dining room, the same table where Helena had placed the suit on the chair 3 weeks ago, the same wallpaper, the same afternoon light coming through the west windows. Chloe stood near the doorway wearing the interview suit, the one I'd worn on December 1st. The one that had hung on my shoulders too wide and too long. But Chloe wasn't smiling. She looked exhausted, haunted, the kind of tired that comes from not sleeping, not from working hard. Her eyes had the hollow quality I'd seen in my own mirror these past 2 weeks. The look of someone who knows something is wrong but can't identify what yet. I turned the photo over. Someone had written the date in pen, April 21st, 2018. I sat on my bedroom floor and pulled out my phone, scrolling to the notes I'd taken during my Harrington family research. The loan documentation I'd found in public business filings. The dates. Harrington Capital Loan to Gregory and Helena Brennan, May 15th, 2018. I'd heard the story about Chloe 100 times. She'd gotten a job at a consulting firm the suit had helped her get it. Helena always said, as if the fabric itself had magical properties. 18 months later, she'd been fired for stealing funds from a client account. Disgraced. Sent to Boston to start over where no one knew her name. The family never talked about it except in whispers, and Chloe had stopped coming home for holidays. I'd always assumed the timeline went job theft accusation, firing, family shame, parents, financial crisis, Harrington loan. But I'd been assembling it wrong. My parents took the Harrington loan on May 15th, 2018. Chloe was fired for alleged fund theft in June 2018, 1 month after the debt, not before. They did this to Chloe 3 years ago. They're doing it to me now. The suit wasn't hand-me-down frugality, it was a costume for a script they'd already performed once. Chloe hadn't stolen anything. She'd been framed. Set up the same way I was being set up now. And when she'd lost her job, when she'd had nowhere to go, and no one who believed her, my parents had used that vulnerability to control her. To make her disappear to Boston and stop asking questions about what had really happened. I looked at the photo again. April 2018, 1 month before the loan. 1 month before everything fell apart for my sister. She'd known something was wrong. I could see it in her face. I put the photo in my jacket pocket next to the USB drive and didn't sleep that night. Diana's assistant called my desk at 9:30 Friday morning. "Ms. Ashford would like to see you at 10, she said. Not a question. A statement. I took the elevator to the 38th floor at 9:55 and waited in the reception area outside the chairman's office until exactly 10 o'clock. The assistant gestured me inside. Diana sat behind her desk, the morning light from floor-to-ceiling windows turning Manhattan into a grid of glass and steel behind her. She looked up when I entered and gestured to the chair across from her. I sat. She didn't start with small talk. She placed a printed document on the desk between us and slid it toward me. I recognized it immediately. My master's thesis from MIT, Risk Assessment Methodologies in Infrastructure Development Under Market Volatility, a comparative analysis of pre- and post-pandemic models. 147 pages I'd spent 18 months researching and writing. But this wasn't a clean copy. Every page had handwritten notes in the margins, questions, circled passages, underlined sentences. The same controlled, precise handwriting I'd seen in pencil on the anonymous documents left on my desk. "I read this before you submitted your application here," Diana said. I picked up the thesis. The notes were extensive, thoughtful. The kind of annotations someone makes when they're genuinely engaging with complex work, not just skimming for highlights. I turned to the title page. In the upper right corner, someone had written a date in small numbers, June 2024. I'd submitted my application to Manhattan Financial in November 2024. "These notes are dated 6 months before I applied," I said. Diana nodded once. 6 months before I applied. She'd been watching me before I even knew this company existed. I set the thesis down carefully and looked at her across the expensive desk in the office at the top of a building I'd entered for the first time 2 weeks ago, wearing a suit designed to make me fail. "So on December 1st morning," I said slowly, "why were you on the Broadway sidewalk?" The question sat between us like something physical. Diana's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. Not surprise, not defensiveness, acknowledgement. She'd been waiting for me to figure it out, waiting for me to ask. "You knew," I continued. "You knew I'd be there. You knew what route I'd take from the subway to this building. You knew exactly when I'd be walking past that specific spot." Yes, Diana said. The admission hung in the air between us. So you didn't fall, I said. You staged it, to see what I'd do. Diana looked at me across her desk at the thesis in my hands, at the question I'd finally asked out loud, at the evidence that she'd been engineering this from long before December 1st. For the first time since the elevator rescue, I saw something shift in her expression, not surprise, but acknowledgement. I had asked the right question. Now I was about to learn whether I was ready for the answer. Diana sat back in her chair and answered the question I'd asked with the kind of honesty that feels more dangerous than any lie. I knew you would be on that sidewalk that morning, she said. I waited. The city stretched out behind her through the windows, indifferent to whatever truth was about to reshape everything I thought I understood about the past 2 weeks. I read your thesis in June, Diana continued. Not because you'd applied here, you hadn't yet, because I make it my business to know who's doing interesting work in my field. Your analysis of post-pandemic infrastructure risk was the most rigorous I'd seen from an academic program in 5 years. So I started tracking you. Tracking, I repeated. Your routine. Your commute. I knew you'd take the Q train from Forest Hills. Knew you'd exit at Fulton Street. Knew you'd walk up Broadway to get here because it's the most direct route, and you're never late to anything that matters. She said it without apology, without pretending it was anything other than what it was. I wanted to see your real reaction when no one was evaluating you, Diana said. Not your interview performance, not the version of yourself you'd prepared to present to a hiring committee. I wanted to see what you'd do when a stranger fell on a sidewalk and you had 8 minutes to get to the most important morning of your life. So you staged a fall? I said. Yes. The admission sat between us, as deliberate and calculated as everything else Diana Ashford had ever done. What did you see? I asked. Diana looked at me directly. The only person on my shortlist who missed the most important morning of her life to pick up documents for a stranger. You gave me your only clean towel. You made yourself late. You didn't hesitate. She had been testing whether I would help someone at cost to myself. I had passed a test I didn't know I was taking. The brown envelope on your desk, I said. The annotated project documents. That was you. Yes. Why? Because Vincent Reynolds has been sabotaging new employees for 4 years, and I needed someone smart enough to survive it without my intervention. Someone who would fight instead of break. Diana leaned forward slightly. I won't show up next time. The rest is up to you. Whatever you're planning, whatever you're building, I can't be part of it. But I wanted you to know I gave you the tools because I believed you'd know how to use them. She stood, which meant the meeting was over. I stood too, holding my thesis, and walked to the door. When I reached it, I turned back. Thank you, I said, for the test, and for being honest about it. Diana nodded once. The same nod she'd given me in the elevator when I'd answered her technical question correctly. I left the 38th floor knowing I was alone now. Exactly as alone as I'd always been, except now I understood which battles were mine to fight. But I'd learned something else 2 days earlier that Diana didn't know about. Wednesday afternoon, December 10th. I'd gone to the 18th floor to retrieve archived documents after my lunch hour research. The floor was quiet. Most people worked from the terminal stations, not the physical file room. I'd been pulling old project records when I heard Julian's voice from around the corner near the printing room. He was on his phone, speaking quietly but not whispering the tone of someone who thought they were alone. She said the presentation is December 19th. He said, 3 weeks from assignment, standard timeline. I froze in the doorway of the file room, invisible from his angle, perfectly positioned to hear every word. I asked about her methodology. Julian continued. She's using current Federal Reserve data cross-referencing with updated municipal development projections. It sounds solid. A pause while whoever was on the other end responded. I couldn't hear the words, but I could hear the voice. Female. Calm. Authoritative. Then Julian again. I will. She trusts me. I'll make sure to ask about any changes to that date. Another pause. No, she doesn't suspect anything. She thinks we're friends. The voice on the other end gave what sounded like final instructions. Julian said, "Yes, ma'am," and ended the call. I stood in the file room doorway and waited for him to walk away. When his footsteps faded down the hall toward the elevators, I stepped out and looked at the empty corridor. The voice giving Julian instructions wasn't Vincent Reynolds. It was my mother. I'd known Julian was reporting to someone. I'd suspected Vincent. But Helena was the coordinator, the architect. Vincent executed the sabotage inside the company. Julian gathered the intelligence. But Helena orchestrated everything from outside, from the dining room in Forest Hills, where she'd placed the suit on the chair, from the phone calls about the Harrington family, from whatever web of debts and obligations connected her to all of this. I walked back to the 24th floor that Wednesday afternoon and said nothing to anyone. Didn't confront Julian. Didn't call my mother. Didn't change my behavior in any visible way. I just added it to the evidence I was building and kept working. Now it was Friday morning. Diana had told me she wouldn't intervene again. But I no longer needed her to. I walked away from that hallway on Wednesday afternoon carrying two things: absolute confirmation that Julian reported directly to Helena and the false December 19th date now circulating through my parents' network. Friday morning, Diana told me she wouldn't intervene again, but I no longer needed her to. I had evidence of the conspiracy, a bait timeline working its way through the system, and a recording device at my desk waiting to capture whoever came to sabotage my work. The trap was set. I just had to survive until December 22nd. I spent the weekend maintaining the performance, responding to Julian's texts about weekend plans, answering my mother's Sunday afternoon call with appropriate vagueness about work behaving exactly as I had for the previous 2 weeks, while the traps I'd set waited to spring. Sunday night at 10 o'clock, I cleared the floor of my Bushwick apartment and began laying out everything I had collected in 14 days, not to admire it, but to see what it meant when assembled. I started with my phone, opening the folder of screenshots I'd taken in the 18th floor archives. Vincent Reynolds's pattern across 4 years. 3 previous projects assigned to new employees with impossible timelines and no mentorship. Project Harborview, October 2021, $62 million. Canceled employee terminated Vincent's signature on the paperwork. Project Gateway, March 2023. $51 million. Canceled employee terminated Vincent's signature. And now, Project Riverside, December 2024, assigned to me. The pattern was so precise, it could have been copied from a template. I laid those screenshots in a row on the left side of my living room floor. Next to them, I placed my old smartphone, the recording device that had been sitting in my desk drawer for 2 weeks, capturing every conversation within range of my workspace. I hadn't listened to the full audio yet. Didn't need to. The device's presence was the point. When someone accessed my computer to sabotage the poisoned analysis I'd left there, they wouldn't know they were being recorded. Above the phone, I arranged my handwritten notes from Julian's questions. 7 specific inquiries over 9 days, each one cataloged with date and exact wording. Tuesday volatility metrics, Wednesday methodology and databases. Thursday the callback to Tuesday's metrics proving his perfect recall. Friday the project amount I'd never mentioned, each question precisely designed to extract intelligence without seeming like interrogation. And next to those notes, I placed my own words written Wednesday afternoon after I'd stood frozen in the 18th floor hallway. Julian reports to Helena. The voice on his phone wasn't Vincent. It was my mother. I sat back on my heels and looked at the evidence spreading across my floor. To the right, I placed the photograph of Chloe from April 2018. My sister in the same suit I'd worn December 1st, looking exhausted instead of successful. And next to it, the timeline I'd reconstructed from public records, Harrington Loan to Gregory and Helena Brennan May, 15th, 2018. Chloe fired for alleged fund theft June 2018. 1 month after the debt, not before. The same script they'd performed with her now running again with me. Above Chloe's photo, I set down the printout of my master's thesis, the copy Diana had shown me Friday morning, with annotations dated June 2024, 6 months before I'd ever applied to work at Manhattan Financial Tower. Proof that the Broadway sidewalk encounter hadn't been coincidence, that I'd been tracked, studied, tested before I knew anyone was watching. And finally, in the center of everything, I placed my research on the Harrington family. $3.2 million in debt. An arranged marriage disguised as a social introduction. A plan that required me to fail so completely I'd view their solution as rescue instead of imprisonment. I sat in the middle of this evidence map at 11:30 Sunday night and saw the shape of the conspiracy whole for the first time. They didn't want me to fail the project. They wanted me to fail myself so completely I'd beg them to arrange my life, because I'd proven I couldn't manage it alone. The suit that didn't fit wasn't poverty. It was costume design for public humiliation. Vincent's impossible project wasn't a challenge. It was a guaranteed failure engineered to be my fault. Julian's friendship wasn't coincidence. It was surveillance disguised as support, feeding intelligence to Helena so she could coordinate every move from outside the building. And the Harrington meeting scheduled for next week, that was the finale. The moment when my parents would offer me escape from the professional disaster they'd orchestrated in exchange for a marriage that would clear their debt and place me permanently under someone else's control. They'd done it to Chloe 3 years ago. Framed her for theft, destroyed her career, used her desperation to make her disappear to Boston, where she couldn't ask questions or demand answers. And now they were running the same play with me, refined and perfected. Except I'd spent 14 days documenting every move. I looked at the evidence spread across my apartment floor. Vincent's pattern, Julian's intelligence gathering the recording device, Chloe's reversed timeline, Diana's pre-surveillance, the Harrington debt, and felt something shift inside my chest. When did I stop fighting to prove I deserved their respect and start fighting because I knew I deserved my own? I couldn't identify the exact moment. Maybe it was finding Chloe's photograph and realizing I wasn't the first daughter they'd tried to sacrifice. Maybe it was hearing my mother's voice giving Julian instructions and understanding the scope of their betrayal. Maybe it was Diana telling me she wouldn't intervene again and realizing I didn't need her to. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe it was the first morning I'd put on that ill-fitting suit and decided to document everything instead of just enduring it. The first time I'd planted a recording device instead of hoping someone would believe me later. The first moment I'd chosen to gather evidence instead of accepting their version of reality. I sat surrounded by 2 weeks of careful documentation and understood something that would have terrified me a month ago. I didn't need my parents' approval anymore. Which meant they couldn't control me through shame, couldn't make me believe I deserved humiliation, couldn't use my fear of disappointing them as leverage to shape my entire life. I sat surrounded by evidence until 2 o'clock Monday morning, and for the first time in 25 years, I wasn't preparing for the worst thing my family could do to me. I was preparing for the best thing I could do for myself. 8 days until December 22nd. The final week would begin in 6 hours, and I would walk into that office knowing something my parents had spent my entire life trying to prevent me from learning, that I didn't need their permission to fight for my own life. I slept 3 hours Sunday night and woke Monday morning with absolute clarity about what the final week required: perfect performance of the person they expected me to be, while knowing exactly who I'd become. Monday morning, I walked into the office at 7:30 carrying the USB drive in my jacket pocket and a performance I would have to sustain for exactly 7 more days. The routine was simple. Arrive early enough to be seen as dedicated. Work visibly at my desk with the bait analysis open on my company computer, the version with the planted error on page 23, the version I'd built specifically for them to destroy. Answer emails, review data, take notes, behave exactly like an intern 3 days from the most important presentation of her career. Julian found me at lunch Monday in the 12th floor cafeteria. Big week, he said, sitting down across from me with his usual easy smile. How are you feeling? Nervous, I said, and I let the word carry weight. Let my hands fidget with my coffee cup, let him see exactly the anxiety he was reporting back to Helena. You've got this, he said. I've seen how hard you've been working. I thanked him and asked about his weekend, and we talked about nothing important while I fed him false confidence about my project, and he memorized every word without writing anything down. Tuesday followed the same pattern. I arrived at 7:30, worked at my desk, made the bait analysis visible on my screen whenever people walked past. At lunch, Julian asked his careful questions. How's the final push going? He asked, still confident about the 20-second. The data's solid, I said. I've triple-checked the risk coefficients, which was true. I had triple-checked them. The real version on my USB drive had coefficients verified against 6 different sources. The bait version on my computer had the coefficient I'd deliberately corrupted. Let me know if you need a second set of eyes before the presentation, Julian offered. That's really kind, I said, and I smiled at him like he was being helpful instead of positioning himself to steal information one final time before the sabotage went live. The hardest part wasn't maintaining the lie, it was maintaining the fear they expected me to feel. I had to perform stress, had to let my shoulders carry tension when Vincent walked past my desk. Had to seem tired in the afternoons like the pressure was wearing me down. Had to project the image of someone barely holding it together, someone who would shatter completely when her files disappeared 4 days before the presentation. Wednesday, I worked until 7, visible and dedicated and exactly where they needed me to be. I answered Julian's questions about timeline adjustments and data sources, feeding him details from the bait version that would all prove irrelevant in 4 days. Then I went home to Bushwick, made dinner I barely ate, and waited. My phone buzzed at 11:04. Recording notification. 8 minutes, 42 seconds of audio captured at Manhattan Financial Tower, 24th floor desk station, 47. My desk. I sat on my bed and pressed play. Footsteps first. Careful, but not silent. Someone entering the open workspace after hours when only security and late working executives remained. The footsteps approached my desk area, paused. A drawer opened, my drawer, the one where I kept orientation materials and personal items and the recording device they didn't know existed. Keyboard sounds. Someone typing at my workstation. Logging in with credentials that shouldn't have worked unless they had my password. Unless someone in IT or HR had provided access. The keyboard activity continued for 8 minutes. I could hear the rhythm of it, not frantic, methodical. Someone navigating through files, finding what they wanted, executing the deletion. Then, a soft chime, I recognized the file deletion confirmation sound. Then Vincent Reynolds's voice, slightly distant on a phone call. It's done, he said. The analysis is completely gone. You can confirm the payment. A pause while the other person responded. I couldn't hear the other voice clearly, but I heard the tone, male, authoritative, satisfied. Transfer will process tomorrow morning, the distant voice said. You can confirm the payment. 8 words that turned sabotage into conspiracy. This wasn't workplace rivalry. This wasn't Vincent Reynolds being cruel or incompetent. This was a paid operation. Money changing hands for the deliberate destruction of an employee's work. The recording continued. 8 minutes of near silence, just the ambient sound of the empty office at night, the hum of computers, the distant elevator. Vincent had stayed to ensure the deletion completed properly. Professional thoroughness in executing fraud. Then footsteps again, moving away from my desk, heading toward the hallway. And finally Julian's voice from what sounded like the hallway near the elevators. All clear. He'd been the lookout. The friendly intern who'd befriended me, earned my trust, extracted intelligence, and now stood guard while someone else destroyed the work I'd spent 3 weeks building. Except they hadn't destroyed my work. They'd destroyed the bait I'd created specifically for them to find. The real analysis sat on a USB drive in my jacket pocket, hanging in my closet 6 feet from where I sat, listening to them celebrate erasing what they thought was my only copy. I listened to the recording 3 times, memorized every word, every sound, every second of the 8 minutes they'd spent deleting the file I'd created specifically for them to destroy. They had taken the bait perfectly. I had audio evidence of Vincent Reynolds committing fraud, proof of Julian's involvement as an accessory, confirmation of financial payment making this a criminal conspiracy, and testimony of deliberate file destruction. 5 days until the December 22nd board meeting. Thursday morning, I would walk into that office still pretending I had no idea my work had been erased. I would discover the deletion with convincing shock. I would react exactly as they expected with panic and desperation, and the beginning of the breakdown they'd been engineering since November 30th. And I would let them believe they'd won right up until the moment I proved they'd lost. Thursday morning arrived with the precision of a performance I'd rehearsed in my head 50 times since listening to the recording. I opened my laptop at exactly 8 o'clock, clicked on the project folder, and let my face register the shock of discovering 3 weeks of work had vanished overnight. The trick to performing genuine surprise is understanding that shock happens in stages. First confusion, clicking refresh, checking the file path, assuming you made a mistake. Then disbelief, opening the trash folder, searching the entire system, running recovery software. Finally, the moment when understanding hits, and your body reacts before your brain can control it. I let my hand go to my mouth, let my breathing change. Stood up from my desk fast enough that my chair rolled backward. 2 interns at nearby desks looked up. I caught one of their eyes and saw pity. "Everything okay?" someone asked. I shook my head, sat down, stared at my screen like it had just betrayed me. 7 minutes later, Vincent Reynolds appeared at my desk. "Miss Brennan," he said, "my office, please." I followed him across the floor carrying my laptop, performing the walk of someone whose entire career had just evaporated. Vincent's office had windows overlooking the financial district. He gestured to the chair across from his desk, the same chair where he'd handed me the impossible project 3 weeks ago. "I'm afraid we'll need to postpone the presentation indefinitely," he said, settling into his chair with practiced regret. "Without your analysis files, there's simply no project to present." He delivered the line smoothly, almost kindly, like he was breaking bad news instead of executing the final phase of a plan he'd been paid to complete. I looked at him for a long moment, let silence stretch between us. Then I spoke carefully, as if the idea was just forming. "The board meeting on the 22nd, I said. Could you give me 10 minutes? Vincent's expression shifted slightly. "For what?" "To give the presentation." He stared at me. I watched him process what I'd just said. Watched him calculate whether I was serious or delusional. Watched him arrive at the conclusion that either way this would be entertaining. "You just said your files are gone," he pointed out. "They are," I confirmed. "But I know the analysis. I've been working on it for 3 weeks. I can present the findings from memory, show the methodology, answer questions. 10 minutes. That's all I'm asking." Vincent leaned back in his chair. The pause lasted 5 seconds, maybe 6. Long enough for me to see exactly what he was thinking, that I was desperate, that I was grasping at straws, that watching me fail publicly in front of the entire board of directors would be infinitely more satisfying than simply canceling the presentation. He said okay, like someone closing a trap they'd spent weeks building. "Okay," he repeated. 10 minutes, December 22nd, 2 p.m. board conference room, 39th floor. "Thank you," I said. And I made my voice carry gratitude, as if he'd just done me a favor instead of granting me permission to walk into an execution he'd carefully arranged. I left his office and returned to my desk, where I sat staring at my empty project folder for another hour, visible and defeated exactly as expected. The rest of Thursday passed in careful performance. Julian found me at lunch, offered sympathy I accepted with appropriate despair. I worked late reviewing what little remained of my files, the bait documents that no longer mattered. I went home to Bushwick at 7:30 and waited. Before I tell you what that message said Thursday night, if you're still with me, comment A or BA equals trust, unknown contacts, B equals ignore them, and add one short reason why. Please note some upcoming details are adapted for storytelling. The core truth is what matters here. The text came at 9:47 p.m. Unknown number. New York area code. One sentence that stopped my breath. Do you need mom and dad's bank records from 7 years ago? I have a copy. I stared at the message for 30 seconds. Then I called the number. It rang twice. Hello. The voice was familiar in the way childhood memories are familiar, something you recognize before you can name it. My sister's voice. 3 years of silence ending with a single sentence, I have a copy. Chloe, I said. I didn't know if you'd call, she said. And I heard exhaustion in her voice that matched the exhaustion I'd seen in the April 2018 photograph. I've been watching, trying to figure out when to reach out. They won't leave me alone. They know I kept the files. Chloe Brennan, my 28-year-old sister who once wore this same suit, existed only as absence and old photographs until her anonymous message arrived, offering the evidence that would vindicate us both. What files? I asked, even though I already knew. Everything, Chloe said. The Harrington loan documents, the fabricated theft accusation, the email chains proving they set me up after they needed leverage to control me. 7 years of records showing the pattern they refined before running it on you. I sat down on my bed, phone pressed to my ear. Why now? I asked. Because I didn't want you to end up like me, Chloe said quietly. Exiled to Boston, cut off from everyone, too afraid to fight back because I thought I was alone. But I needed to wait until you were ready, until you were strong enough to use what I could give you. How did you know I was ready? Because you're still there, Chloe said. 3 weeks into an impossible project, still showing up every morning. That's how I knew. You're not running, you're fighting. And that means you're ready for the ammunition. I looked at the window of my Bushwick apartment at my reflection against the December darkness. Send me everything, I said. I will, Chloe promised. Tomorrow morning. Everything I've kept hidden for 7 years. Use it better than I did. We stayed on the phone for another 10 minutes. Not talking about strategy or evidence, just talking. Sisters reconnecting across 3 years of silence and a shared understanding of what our parents were capable of doing to their own children. I stood by my apartment window Thursday night, holding my phone, processing what Chloe had just offered: 7 years of financial records, proving the Harrington debt, the timeline of her false theft accusation, and the pattern our parents had refined before running it on me. 4 days until December 22nd. I had Vincent on recording, Julian exposed, my presentation memorized, and now my sister's evidence completing the picture. The trap I'd set for them was about to become a prosecution. Before I tell you what that message said Thursday night, if you're still with me, comment A or BA equals trust, unknown contacts, B equals ignore them, and add one short reason why. Please note some upcoming details are adapted for storytelling. The core truth is what matters here. Chloe promised the files would arrive Friday morning. They came 6 hours earlier. The email from Chloe arrived at 11:03 Thursday night with a subject line that contained only 3 words: everything. Since 2018. I sat at my kitchen table in Bushwick and opened the attachments. 7 files. 7 years of evidence my sister had kept hidden from our parents while building a life in Boston that looked like escape, but was actually exile. The first file was labeled Harrington Debt Complete. I opened it and found every document from the original loan through current status. $3.2 million borrowed May 15th, 2018. Payment schedule showing monthly interest accumulating because the principal had never been touched. Current balance as of December 2024, $3.4 million with accrued interest. The second file contained wire transfer records. I scrolled through dates and amounts until I found what I was looking for: 3 payments to Vincent Reynolds. $28,000 on December 3rd, $28,000 on December 10th, $29,000 on December 17th, $85,000 total paid in 3 installments while he executed my sabotage. The third file was an email chain. I opened it and read the sender line, Gregory Brennan. Recipients, Helena Brennan, Richard Harrington. Date, June 14th, 2024. Subject, second daughter arrangement. I read it once, then again, then a third time, each word confirming what I'd suspected but hadn't wanted to believe. Following our previous discussions regarding debt resolution, Helena and I propose arranging marriage between our second daughter and your son Michael within the next 12 months. Audrey is 25, educated, and will be positioned for professional failure by year end to ensure cooperation. This arrangement eliminates our outstanding obligation and provides your family with the alliance we discussed. Helena will coordinate timeline and logistics. Richard Harrington's response dated June 16th, 2024. Agreed. Michael is aware and willing. Proceed with positioning the daughter as discussed. We'll formalize terms once she's adequately motivated to accept. June 2024. 3 months before I applied. The internship was never the goal. It was the weapon. I sat at my kitchen table until 1 in the morning reading through every document Chloe had sent. The conspiracy wasn't improvised. It was architected, planned months in advance. The internship application they'd encouraged me to submit in September. The impossible project Vincent assigned in December. The arranged marriage meeting scheduled for next week. Every piece designed to break me so completely that marrying a stranger to clear my parents' debt would seem like the only option. They'd done it to Chloe first, refined the process, then run it again on me with improvements. I saved every file to 3 separate backup drives and went to bed at 2 a.m., knowing exactly what I would do in 6 hours. Friday morning, I arrived at the office at 7:30 and positioned myself in the empty hallway on the 24th floor. Most interns didn't arrive until 8. The floor was quiet except for the hum of computers and the distant sound of the early janitorial crew finishing their rounds. I stood near the elevator bank and waited. Julian stepped off the elevator at 7:45, coffee in hand, looking relaxed. He saw me and smiled, that easy smile I'd watched him deploy for 3 weeks. The smile died when he saw my face. "I know what you're doing," I said. My voice was calm, flat. The kind of calm that comes from being absolutely certain. "I have audio evidence of every call to my mother, every report, every detail you extracted and sold." Julian's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "2 options," I continued. "Voluntary resignation today, or I send everything to legal and HR within 1 hour. You choose." He looked at me for 3 seconds. Not confusion, not surprise, just calculation. The same expression I'd seen on Helena's face 100 times, someone deciding which version of the story to tell. He didn't deny it. He didn't apologize. He just left, turned around, walked back to the elevator, pressed the button. The doors opened immediately. They were still waiting from his arrival 30 seconds earlier. He stepped inside without a word, without looking back, without any of the performance I'd become so familiar with. Just acceptance. Professional acknowledgement that he'd been caught and the contract was over. The doors closed on his silence. I stood in the empty hallway and watched the floor numbers descend, watched him exit the building, watched one piece of the conspiracy remove itself from the board without me having to expend any additional energy destroying it. Julian Hayes wasn't conflicted. He wasn't manipulated. He was a mercenary who'd been paid to gather intelligence and had accepted the terms of failure when those terms arrived. No drama, no justification. Just transaction, completed, consequences, accepted, exit, performed. I returned to my desk at 7:50 and logged into my company email. At 8:15, I received an automated HR notification: Julian Hayes has submitted voluntary resignation, effective immediately. By 8:30, his desk had been cleared, By 9, his employee access had been revoked. By 9:15, it was as if he'd never worked here at all. I watched Vincent walk past my desk at 9:30. He didn't mention Julian's absence, didn't ask questions, just gave me a brief nod and continued to his office. He didn't know yet that I had him on recording. Didn't know Chloe had sent me 7 years of evidence. Didn't know the presentation he expected me to fail on Sunday would be the most prepared 10 minutes of my life. 3 days until the board meeting. I watched the elevator doors close on Julian Hayes at 7:48 Friday morning, eliminating one conspirator from the battlefield 3 days before the war. I had Chloe's 7-year evidence proving premeditated conspiracy audio recordings of Vincent's paid sabotage documentation of my parents' $3.2 million debt, an arranged marriage plan, and a presentation I'd memorized from the real analysis they thought they'd destroyed. Sunday, December 22nd, I would walk into that board meeting with everything. But first I had to make it through one more weekend at home. The weekend passed in 48 hours of careful performance at the Forest Hills dining table, nodding through conversations about the Harrington family meeting, while knowing every word of the emails that had arranged my sale. Sunday morning at 8:32, 90 minutes before the board meeting, my phone lit up with an email from Vincent Reynolds addressed to all 8 board members, the subject line reading, "Urgent security concern regarding intern Brennan." I opened it standing in my Bushwick apartment, already dressed in the charcoal suit Diana had given me the USB drive in my jacket pocket. The email contained one sentence and one video attachment. Surveillance footage from December 5th shows intern Brennan receiving unauthorized materials from an external source. Internal security review recommended before today's presentation proceeds. I downloaded the video and pressed play. The footage showed my desk from the security camera angle above the 24th floor workspace. Time-stamped December 5th, 7:30 a.m. The office was empty except for me arriving early as I'd done every morning for 3 weeks. The video showed me approaching my desk, pausing, picking up something from the surface, the brown envelope. But the footage had been edited. Selective framing. Strategic cuts. The angle made it look clandestine, like I was receiving classified documents from a competitor, instead of finding assistance someone had left to help me survive Vincent's sabotage. The email was designed to trigger an immediate security investigation, to cancel the board meeting, to ensure I never got my 10 minutes. I watched the video 3 times, then paused it and zoomed in frame by frame. There, frozen at 7:31 a.m., my hand reaching for the envelope, my uniform visible in the frame. The stain. The same stain from December 1st morning, dark against the light fabric of the sleeve. Proof that I'd stopped on Broadway to help a woman whose papers had scattered across the sidewalk. Proof that I'd dragged my sleeve through something oily near the curb while gathering documents for a stranger. Proof that the woman had been Diana Ashford. The thing meant to shame me helping a stranger when I should have been running had become the thing that would save me. If the stain was visible in the December 5th footage, and the stain came from helping the chairman on December 1st, then anyone examining the video closely would know the envelope came from inside the building. From someone who knew I'd helped Diana. From someone who wanted to give me the tools to fight back. Not corporate espionage, internal assistance. I grabbed my laptop and took the elevator to the 38th floor. Diana's office door was open. She sat at her desk reviewing documents, dressed in the same severe charcoal suit she'd worn the day she'd tested me in the elevator with a single technical question. I knocked. She looked up. "The stain," I said, placing my laptop on her desk and turning the screen to show the frozen frame. "December 1st. Do you recognize it?" Diana leaned forward and examined the image. Several seconds of silence while she processed what I was showing her. Then she spoke with absolute certainty. "That's the stain from when you helped me on Broadway." I nodded. "Vincent sent this video to the entire board 30 minutes ago, claims it's evidence of corporate espionage. But if you verify that stain came from helping you, then the envelope was internal assistance, not external conspiracy." Diana finished. She stood, took her charcoal coat from the back of her chair, and said simply, I'll go with you. We entered the 38th floor boardroom at exactly 10 o'clock. 8 members of the board of directors sat around the conference table, experienced executives whose combined decision would determine whether justice or sabotage prevailed. Vincent Reynolds stood at the head of the table, positioned with the confidence of someone who just played what he believed was a winning move. He saw me enter with Diana at my side, and something flickered across his face. Not quite concern, not quite confusion, just recalculation. I didn't wait for him to speak. Didn't wait for him to reference the security concern or demand the meeting be postponed. I walked directly to the conference table, placed my USB drive on the polished surface, and delivered my opening statement. I don't have slides, I said. My voice was calm, clear. The voice of someone who'd spent 3 weeks preparing for exactly this moment. But I have 3 things. 8 board members looked at me. Diana stood silent beside my chair. Vincent's expression shifted from confidence to something harder to name. Nick, the complete $47 million project analysis, I continued. In memory, every data point, every risk coefficient, every methodology decision. I can present it without notes. I paused. Let that statement register. Let them understand what it meant that I could deliver a complex financial analysis entirely from recall. I also have audio proof of who deleted my files on December 17th. I said, and documentation of who paid them to do it. 2 seconds. That's how long it took for Vincent Reynolds to blink. Which would the board prefer to hear first? I asked. Vincent's eyes met mine across the table. For 3 weeks he'd held eye contact with certainty. Every time he'd called me into his office, every time he'd assigned impossible work or delivered performative regret. Every morning when he'd walked past my desk knowing exactly what he was engineering. This time, after 2 seconds, he looked down first. A board member, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and reading glasses, set down her pen and spoke. Let's start with the project, she said. The boardroom held 8 members of the board of directors. 1 chairman standing beside me, 1 saboteur who'd just looked away, and 1 USB drive containing everything. I had waited 21 days for this moment since the morning I walked in, wearing my sister's suit, and Vincent called my name across a room of silent witnesses. Now, the room was silent again. But this time, I was the one speaking. I began without preamble, without apology, without slides. The $47 million infrastructure development project was originally canceled in 2021 due to risk analysis based on outdated volatility data from the 2022 market correction. I said, the original analysis miscalculated risk by using market data that no longer reflected post-2023 infrastructure development patterns. I'm going to walk you through the corrected assessment. For 20 minutes, I delivered the complete analysis, market volatility trends from 2023 forward, infrastructure timeline adjustments accounting for supply chain corrections, and revised municipal approval processes. Risk coefficients recalculated using current Federal Reserve constants. Financial projections showing the project would generate positive returns within 18 months under corrected parameters. I spoke without notes, without hesitation. Every number I'd triple-checked on the USB drive in my pocket was now spoken aloud in a boardroom where 8 executives took notes, and Diana stood silent beside my chair. When I paused to transition from Section 4 to Section 5, a board member, a man in his 50s with silver-rimmed glasses, raised his pen. Can you repeat the adjusted coefficient from Section 4.3? He asked. I looked at him directly. 0.847 adjusted from the original 0.623 to account for the 2023 infrastructure development timeline shift. The correction accounts for the 18-month delay in municipal permitting that the original analysis didn't anticipate. He wrote it down. Nodded. Didn't ask me to verify it against documentation because the question wasn't about checking my math. They weren't testing whether I'd memorized the numbers. They were verifying I understood them. I continued through sections 5, 6, and 7. risk mitigation strategies, contingency planning, financial modeling under 3 different market scenarios. When I finished at 10:25, the room held the kind of silence that comes after complex information has been delivered cleanly. The silver-haired board member who'd asked about Section 4 spoke first. The board will initiate a 48-hour detailed review of this analysis, she said. We'll need you to submit the complete documentation on that USB drive to the legal department for verification, but preliminarily, she glanced at the other board members. This is comprehensive work. I nodded, placed the USB drive on the table. Then I spoke carefully. Before the review begins, there's evidence the board needs to see regarding why my files were deleted 4 days ago. I pulled my laptop from my bag, connected it to the boardroom screen, and opened the audio file from December 17th. This is 8 minutes of recording from 11:04 p.m. last Wednesday, I said, captured by a device I placed in my desk drawer under New York's one-party consent law. I pressed play. The boardroom speakers filled with the sound of footsteps approaching my desk. A drawer opening. Keyboard activity. Methodical, deliberate someone navigating through files with purpose. The soft chime of file deletion. Then Vincent Reynolds's voice, slightly distant on a phone call. It's done, the recording said. The analysis is completely gone. You can confirm the payment. A pause. Another voice responding, too quiet to distinguish words. Then Vincent again. Transfer will process tomorrow morning. 8 board members sat frozen. Diana remained standing beside me, her expression unchanged. Vincent sat at the head of the table, his face carefully blank. I stopped the audio and opened the second file. This morning, Mr. Reynolds sent an email to the entire board claiming I'd received unauthorized materials from an external source, I said. He attached security footage from December 5th, showing me receiving an envelope at my desk, but the footage was edited. I displayed 2 videos side by side on the screen. Vincent's version on the left, the building's original security footage on the right. Same timestamp, same angle, different framing. The edited version removes 30 seconds of context showing me arriving for my normal workday, I said. And it crops the frame to make the envelope receipt look clandestine. But both videos show the same detail. I zoomed in on my uniform sleeve in both frames. The stain, visible in the December 5th footage. The same stain I'd gotten helping a stranger on Broadway 4 days earlier. Diana, I said quietly. She stepped forward and spoke with absolute clarity. The stain in both videos, December 5th and this morning's edited version, is from December 1st, when she helped me on Broadway, after I dropped my documents, Diana said. She was late to her interview because she stopped to help me. The envelope on her desk December 5th was internal assistance from someone who knew she'd helped the chairman, not external espionage. Vincent Reynolds opened his mouth. No sound came out. Security was already standing. One of the board members, the woman who'd asked for the 48-hour review, looked at Vincent and spoke with the kind of cold precision that comes from seeing evidence too clear to dispute. Escort Mr. Reynolds to legal and compliance, she said to security. No one leaves this floor until HR processes the suspension. Vincent stood, looked at me for 1 second, at Diana for another. Then at the board members who'd watched him orchestrate 3 weeks of sabotage and heard him confirm payment for destroying an intern's work. He'd prepared no explanation, no justification, no contingency for a scenario where the person he'd tried to destroy had recorded everything. Security stepped forward. Vincent walked to the door without speaking, without the performance he'd maintained so carefully for 3 weeks. Just silence and the sound of expensive shoes on boardroom carpet. The door closed behind him at 10:44, leaving his chair empty at the head of the table where he'd sat with absolute confidence 16 minutes earlier. 8 board members, 1 chairman and 1 former intern remained in a room that had just witnessed 3 weeks of sabotage collapse in 20 minutes of memory and 8 minutes of audio. The silver-haired board member looked at me and asked, "What else do we need to know?" I opened one more file on my laptop, the email Chloe had sent me Thursday night. The subject line visible on the screen, everything, since 2018. "There's one more piece of evidence," I said, "about who paid Vincent Reynolds, and why." I was pulling up Chloe's 7-year evidence file when my phone vibrated against the conference table at 11:03, and I saw her name on the screen again with a new subject line that read, "The payment receipts you'll need." I opened it without asking permission, without waiting for the board to finish their discussion of Vincent's suspension. The email contained 3 wire transfer receipts, each one time-stamped and documented with the kind of precision that comes from someone who's spent years learning to protect herself through evidence. $30,000. Gregory and Helena Brennan to Vincent Reynolds. December 3rd, 2024. Payment Memo Consulting Services. $30,000. Same sender, same recipient. December 10th, 2024. Payment Memo Project Management. $25,000. December 15th, 2024. Payment Memo Final Deliverable. $85,000 total sent in 3 precise installments from my parents' joint account to the man who'd sabotaged me. Each payment timed to Vincent's escalating actions. The first after he'd assigned the impossible project. The second after I'd started making real progress. The third 2 days before he deleted my files. I forwarded the email to the corporation's legal and compliance department while still sitting in the boardroom. Didn't ask the board's permission. Didn't explain what I was doing. Just tapped the forward button, typed the legal department email address, and pressed send. Diana caught my eye across the table. I nodded slightly. She nodded back. That single nod from Diana meant more than the blazer she lent me, more than standing beside me in the boardroom. It meant I see who you are now. The board continued their discussion. Security protocols, legal review procedures, timeline for formal investigation. I sat in my chair and listened to them process what had just collapsed in less than an hour. At 11:45, the board meeting adjourned. Diana returned to her office. I went back to my desk on the 24th floor and worked through lunch reviewing documentation, answering follow-up questions from legal, behaving exactly like someone whose Sunday afternoon involved normal professional responsibilities. At 2 o'clock, my desk phone rang. First floor reception. "There are 2 individuals here demanding to see you." The receptionist said, her voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone describing a situation she'd been trained not to judge. "They're refusing to leave. They're causing a disturbance." "I'll be right down," I said. I took the elevator to the lobby and stepped out into marble and glass and the kind of architectural intimidation that comes from buildings designed to remind you of your place in the world. Gregory and Helena Brennan stood 15 feet from the reception desk, speaking loudly to a man in his 40s, holding a press badge and a phone set to record. Marcus Whitmore, Wall Street Journal senior business reporter, who'd apparently been in the lobby conducting routine quarterly interviews when my parents arrived and began their performance. "This corporation has turned our daughter against her own family," Gregory said, his voice carrying across the marble with practiced projection. "She refuses to help her sick parents. We raised her, paid for her education, and now she abandons us to pursue selfish ambition." Helena stood beside him, perfectly composed in the way she'd always been perfectly composed. "She's always been ungrateful," she told the reporter. "Difficult, unreliable. We sacrificed everything for her education, and this is how she repays us." Gregory turned slightly, addressing the reporter, but playing to the broader audience of employees crossing the lobby. "We will contact every investor in this company. The truth about this corporation's treatment of families will be exposed." I stood 15 feet away and simply observed. Didn't move toward them. Didn't defend myself. Didn't cry or argue or engage with the performance they'd spent 25 years perfecting the art of making me responsible for their choices, their debts, their failures. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just stood there and let them perform for an audience that was already recording. Helena turned and locked eyes with me. I recognized the gaze immediately. The same dismissive assessment she'd deployed November 30th when she'd placed Chloe's suit on the dining room chair. The look that said I was being evaluated and found insufficient. The expression designed to make me small. I held her eyes. Didn't flinch. Didn't look away. Didn't give her the reaction she'd spent 25 years conditioning me to perform. 5 seconds passed. Maybe 6. Long enough for her to realize I wasn't going to break. Long enough for her to understand that the daughter who'd worn an ill-fitting suit 3 weeks ago had become someone she could no longer control through shame. Helena looked away first. Not dramatically. Just a slight shift of her gaze to Gregory, a small recalculation of strategy. But I saw it. The moment when my mother understood that her most reliable weapon, making me believe I deserved her contempt, had stopped working. Gregory continued his speech to the reporter about corporate responsibility and family values. Helena stood beside him with her hand on his arm, the picture of concerned parental unity. The lobby receptionist watched from behind her desk with careful professional neutrality. And I stood 15 feet away, wearing the charcoal suit Diana had given me, carrying evidence of their conspiracy in my phone, knowing they'd already lost, but hadn't realized it yet. The elevator doors behind me opened at 2:11. I heard footsteps crossing the marble lobby in the measured cadence of someone who doesn't need to announce their arrival. Not hurried, not hesitant. Just deliberate forward motion with the confidence that comes from 40 years of walking into rooms and knowing exactly what authority you carry. Gregory and Helena were still mid-performance when the footsteps stopped. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I already knew Diana Ashford had followed me down. Diana Ashford didn't look at me when she crossed the lobby. She looked through me the way you'd assess a chess position 3 moves before checkmate. She walked past me without acknowledgement, approached the marble reception desk where Gregory and Helena stood with the Wall Street Journal reporter, and placed a single sheet of paper on the polished surface between my parents and the receptionist. "Mr. and Mrs. Brennan," Diana said. Her voice carried the same measured precision she'd used in the elevator when testing whether I understood risk analysis methodology. "I need to inform you of a change in your financial obligations." Gregory looked at the paper. Helena's hand tightened on his arm. "I now hold 80% of your outstanding debt." Diana continued. $2.56 million of the $3.2 million you owe across 7 creditors. I acquired the debt positions over the past 6 weeks through standard market transactions. The lobby went silent. The WSJ reporter's phone was still recording. The receptionist sat frozen behind her desk. I stood 15 feet away and watched my parents' faces register what Diana had just said. "You have 72 hours to pay in full," Diana said. "The deadline is December 25th, 2:10 p.m., not a minute later." Helena found her voice first. You can't." "The debt is legally mine," Diana said. "The terms are clear. 72 hours. She turned and walked back across the marble lobby without waiting for a response. Didn't look at me, didn't explain. Just delivered the ultimatum with the same cold efficiency she'd used to place my annotated thesis on her desk and test whether I was worth investing in. The elevator doors closed on Diana Ashford at 2:14 p.m., leaving Gregory and Helena Brennan standing in a lobby with a WSJ reporter, a legal document, and 71 hours and 56 minutes to produce $2.56 million they didn't have. I walked back to my desk without speaking to them, without acknowledging the reporter, without offering explanation or defense or engagement with the performance they'd tried to stage. The paper Diana had placed on the reception desk contained 7 stamped seals from 7 different creditors, each one confirming debt transfer to Diana Ashford, each one dated within the past 6 weeks. She'd been quietly buying my parents' financial destruction while I'd been building evidence of their conspiracy. She'd positioned herself to control their fate the same way they'd tried to control mine. 3 days passed in careful silence. December 25th arrived with the particular quiet that comes to office buildings on holidays when only essential personnel remain. I took the elevator to the 32nd floor at 2 o'clock and found Diana waiting in the legal and compliance conference room with the department's chief counsel, a woman in her 60s named Margaret Rosen, who'd spent 40 years building a reputation for thorough, methodical investigation. "Thank you for coming in on Christmas," Margaret said, gesturing to the chair across from her. "I know this is unusual timing." I sat. Diana stood by the window looking out at Manhattan wrapped in December cold. "We filed the SEC report at 9 this morning," Margaret continued. She had a folder open on the table, documents arranged with precise organization. "The evidence you provided, the audio recording, the wire transfer receipts, the timeline of sabotage constitutes clear securities fraud and conspiracy. Mr. Reynolds has been suspended without pay, effective immediately pending the formal investigation." I nodded, waited. "Your father and Mrs. Brennan will receive official notification in 5 business days," Margaret said. "As the parties who paid for the sabotage, they'll be named in the SEC filing as co-conspirators. The notification will include a summons for testimony and the initiation of criminal investigation procedures. 5 business days. After Christmas, after New Year's." The notification would arrive in early January while my parents were still scrambling to meet Diana's deadline. "There's something else," Margaret said. She looked at Diana, then back to me. "Given your position in the company and your relationship to the named parties, you have the option to request a delay in the investigation. Executive privilege. It's not common, but it's available if you want to use it." I looked at Margaret, at her folder of evidence and her 40 years of careful investigation, at Diana standing by the window with her back to both of us. Diana turned around. "So here's my question," Diana said. Her voice was quiet, direct. The kind of question that gets asked once and answered permanently. "Do you want to stop this? You have the power. Do you want to use it?" The conference room held 3 women and a stack of evidence that would destroy my parents' lives as thoroughly as they'd tried to destroy mine. The clock on the wall showed 2:08 p.m. 2 minutes until Diana's 72-hour deadline expired. 2 minutes until my parents would officially default on debt they couldn't pay. 5 business days until the SEC notification arrived and the criminal investigation began. And 1 question from Diana Ashford about whether I wanted to protect the people who'd sold me to clear their debts. I thought about the suit hanging too long on my shoulders, November 30th. About Vincent's smile when he'd assigned the impossible project. About Julian's 7 perfectly memorized questions, and Helena's calculating gaze, and Gregory's performative speeches about family values. I thought about Chloe in Boston, 3 years of exile, because she'd been the first daughter they'd tried to sacrifice. I thought about the brown envelope someone had left on my desk because they'd seen me help a stranger on a sidewalk when I should have been running. Diana's question hung in the air between us like a blade balanced on its edge. I had been given 72 hours of watching my parents scramble to meet an impossible deadline, just as they'd given me 3 weeks to complete an impossible project. The clock on the wall showed 2:09 p.m. 1 minute remained until their deadline expired, and 5 business days until the consequences of their conspiracy would arrive in formal legal notification. "No," I said. "I don't want to stop it." The decision I made Christmas afternoon became permanent Thursday morning when Margaret Rosen called to say Gregory and Helena had requested to sign the SEC notification documents in person. The door to legal and compliance opened at 10 o'clock, and my parents walked through it like defendants entering a courtroom they'd been avoiding for 25 years. I sat at the conference table with Margaret SEC notification documents arranged in front of 2 empty chairs. The room was small, windowless, designed for the kind of conversations that get reduced to signatures and legal timestamps. Helena entered first. Gregory followed. For the first time in my memory, my mother's face showed no calculation, no scheme forming behind her eyes, no assessment of angles or leverage points. Just exhaustion. The kind of tired that comes from spending 72 hours trying to produce millions of dollars that don't exist, failing, and understanding that every move you've made for the past 6 months has led to this room. Helena sat in the chair across from me. Gregory sat beside her. Neither of them looked at me directly. Margaret placed 2 pens on the table. Both signatures are required on pages 4 and 7. She said, her voice carrying the practiced neutrality of someone who'd overseen 1,000 difficult meetings. The SEC will receive copies within 24 hours. You'll be contacted within 5 business days for formal testimony. Gregory picked up the pen first. His hand was steady when he signed page 4. Steady when he turned to page 7. Steady when he set the pen down and looked at Helena. "Helena," he said, "sign it." My mother stared at the documents. I watched her eyes track across the words. SEC investigation. Conspiracy to commit securities fraud. Co-conspirator status. All the careful planning she'd executed with the same precision she used to arrange flowers for charity dinners or select which lies to tell at church, now reduced to legal terminology that would follow her name permanently. She picked up the pen. Her hand trembled slightly, the first time I'd ever seen Helena Brennan's composure crack in a way she couldn't hide. She signed page 4, then page 7. The sound of her pen on paper was the sound of a family ending, and it was quieter than I'd expected. No dramatic pronouncements, no tears or raised voices. Just signatures on legal documents in a windowless conference room on the 32nd floor of a building where my parents had orchestrated my destruction and I had documented theirs. My mother had finally run out of moves and the board was mine. Margaret collected the documents, placed them in a folder, and stood. "You'll receive formal notice at your home address," she said. "The legal department has no further business with you today." She left the conference room, taking the folder with her, leaving the 3 of us in silence. Gregory turned to me, spoke for the first time since entering the room. "You are my flesh and blood," he said. The words landed in the space between us with the weight of everything he wasn't saying. That I owed him. That family meant something. That whatever he'd done, I should have protected him because we shared DNA and a last name, and 25 years of sitting at the same dining room table. I met his eyes, didn't look away, didn't flinch. "I know," I said. "That's why this took 25 years. Silence. Helena's hands lay flat on the table. Fingers spread like she was trying to hold on to something that was already gone. Gregory's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes registered that I'd just answered a question he hadn't known he was asking. If I hadn't been their daughter, this would have taken 25 days. Maybe 25 hours. But I'd spent 25 years learning to endure their judgment, to question my own worth, to believe I deserved whatever diminishment they offered. Learning to see them clearly enough to fight back required unlearning everything they'd taught me about my place in the world. I stood, pushed my chair back. Margaret had taken the SEC documents, but there were other papers on the table, blank forms for family severance, official disownment declarations that some families filed when relationships ended formally. I didn't touch them, didn't sign anything, didn't need to. Their conspiracy was documented. Their debt was called. Their daughter was leaving. No paperwork required. I walked to the door, put my hand on the handle. The metal was cold under my palm, and for just a second I thought about the weight of this moment, walking out of a room where my parents sat in defeat, closing a door on 25 years of calculated cruelty disguised as family. The weight of leaving felt lighter than the weight I'd been carrying since I could remember. I didn't slam the door. I just closed it behind me and kept walking. The hallway stretched ahead of me, standard office corridor, fluorescent lights, doors to other conference rooms where other people were having other difficult conversations. Behind me, the door to legal and compliance conference room B remained closed. My parents sat on the other side, probably talking to each other, probably deciding what to tell the Harrington family, or how to appeal the SEC investigation, or which version of this story would make them look less culpable. I didn't know. I didn't care. I just kept walking. No footsteps followed me. No voices called me back. No one stopped me to ask where I was going or why I was leaving or whether I understood the magnitude of what I'd just done. I pressed the elevator button and waited. The hallway behind me stretched empty and silent. No footsteps following. No voices calling me back. No need to explain to anyone why I wasn't their daughter anymore. The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside, pressed the button for the first floor. As the elevator descended, I thought about Diana's words from Christmas Day. Do you want to stop this? You have the power. Do you want to use it? I'd answered no, and the no had meant I don't need to protect people who tried to destroy me. I don't owe loyalty to conspiracy. I don't have to choose them just because we share blood. The elevator reached the first floor. The doors opened on the lobby where my parents had performed their last public denunciation 3 days ago, where Diana had delivered a 72-hour deadline they couldn't meet, where I'd stood silent while they'd tried to shame me one final time. I stepped out into marble and glass and the rest of my life. The contract on Diana's desk had my name typed at the bottom, but the title above it wasn't receptionist anymore. Senior Financial Analyst, I read aloud. Direct report to the chairman. Diana Ashford sat across from me in her office on the 43rd floor, fingers steepled, watching me with those calculating gray eyes. December 26th. The day after I'd walked out of legal and compliance and left my father with unsigned papers and a legacy in ruins. Outside her window, the city stretched gray and cold under winter clouds. 25 years ago, I'd looked at this same skyline from the lobby floor. Base salary $220,000, Diana said. 40% performance bonus tied to strategic initiatives. Full benefits? Stock options vest after 1 year. I set the contract down carefully. The paper was heavy, expensive, real. Why, because you spent 25 years learning how this company actually works, Diana said. Not from boardrooms. From the ground. You know where every body is buried because you saw them dig the graves. I looked up from the contract. That's one way to put it. It's the only way to put it. Diana leaned forward slightly. Gregory Reynolds built an empire on shortcuts and silence. I'm inheriting a crisis. The SEC investigation, the media scrutiny, the shareholder lawsuits, all of it traces back to systems he put in place decades ago. My entry twist landed clean and cold. This wasn't charity. This wasn't even reward. Diana Ashford was hiring me as a strategic weapon, someone who understood Reynolds Enterprises' vulnerabilities from the inside out, who could identify risks before they metastasized into scandals. You're not hiring an analyst, I said. You're hiring an insurance policy. I'm hiring the person who brought down Gregory Reynolds, Diana corrected. The person who documented, strategized, and executed a 25-year plan without a single legal misstep. That's not revenge, Audrey. That's precision. She pushed a pen across the desk. I picked it up. Mont Blanc. Heavy. The kind of pen that signs documents that matter. Your first project, Diana said, will be a comprehensive audit of all subsidiary operations. I want to know what else your father buried, what other shortcuts, what other vulnerabilities. We're going public with full transparency, no more secrets. I clicked the pen once. The sound was small and final. Then I signed my name at the bottom of the contract right below, where it said, Senior Financial Analyst Office of the Chairman. Diana held out her hand. I shook it. Her grip was firm, professional. Welcome to Reynolds Enterprises, she said. Again. Thank you, Diana. She smiled slightly. You can call me Ms. Ashford in meetings, but between us, Diana's fine. I left her office with a copy of the contract in my bag and drove straight to the cafe where I'd asked Chloe to meet me. My first pattern interrupt hit me in the parking lot, the weight of the contract in my bag against the weight of the bundle I'd carried for 2 decades. One felt like future. One felt like past. Both felt impossibly heavy. Chloe was already at a corner table when I walked in. She looked up and smiled. And for a moment I saw the 10-year-old who used to sneak into my room when Mom and Dad were fighting. Chloe Hartman was 39 now, 8 years younger than me. She'd inherited Dad's dark hair, but Mom's soft features, round face, kind brown eyes, a gentleness that somehow survived our childhood intact. She worked as a middle school art teacher in Portland, had been married to Marcus for 12 years, had 2 kids I saw in Christmas photos, but rarely in person. She stood when I reached the table, pulled me into a hug that smelled like vanilla and paint thinner. "God, Audrey," she whispered. "I saw the news. I've been trying to call you for 2 days." "I know, I'm sorry. I needed time to think." We sat. I ordered coffee I wouldn't drink. She already had tea steaming in front of her. "I brought you something I said. I pulled the folded bundle from my bag and set it on the table between us. Chloe stared at it. "Is that my receptionist uniform?" I said. 25 years old, I kept it. She reached out, slowly touched the navy fabric with her fingertips. Her hand trembled slightly. "Why?" "Because I needed to remember what I was fighting for," I said. "And now I need to let it go." My second pattern interrupt arrived in Chloe's expression, the way her eyes filled without spilling over, the way she understood, without needing explanation. Some things don't require words between sisters. "You did it," she said quietly. "You actually did it." I did. And now, I told her about the contract, about the title, the salary, the office on the 43rd floor, about Diana Ashford and the strategic audit, and the fresh start that somehow felt like vindication and opportunity braided together. Chloe listened, nodding, smiling in the right places. She asked about my start date, about what the role would involve, about whether I'd finally leave the apartment I'd lived in for 2 decades. But when I finished, her expression shifted. She leaned forward, slightly lowered her voice. "Audrey," she said carefully, "I'm happy for you, I am, but I have to ask." She glanced at the uniform, then back at me. My exit twist crystallized in her next words. "Diana Ashford just became chairman of a company that's hemorrhaging value and facing federal investigation," Chloe said. "She's inheriting a disaster. And her first move is to hire you, the woman whose evidence brought down the previous CEO, at $220,000 a year, plus bonus direct report to the chairman." She paused. "So I have to ask," Chloe said, her eyes searching mine. "What does Diana actually want from you? Because this feels less like a job offer and more like something else entirely." I met Chloe's eyes across the cafe table, the uniform still folded between us. "Diana wants someone who understands the company from the bottom up," I said quietly. "Someone who documented everything for 25 years. She's rebuilding Chloe. She needs someone who knows where the bodies are buried. And you're okay with that?" "I'm okay with being valued for what I know." Chloe studied me for a long moment, then nodded. I folded the uniform back into my bag. I'd meant to leave it behind, but I couldn't. Not yet. Diana Ashford's assistant called at 8:47 a.m. on January 3rd to schedule a 10-minute meeting, and I knew before I walked into her office that this was the last test. I'd spent the first week of January learning the analyst systems, reading audit reports, sitting in on preliminary meetings with department heads. Diana had assigned me a mentor from strategic planning, but she'd also scheduled 3 brief check-ins throughout the week. Each one felt like an examination I couldn't quite see the questions for. This was the 4th. I arrived at her office on the 43rd floor at 8:58 a.m. Her assistant waved me through. Diana sat behind her desk reading something on her tablet. She looked up when I entered, set the device down, gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit." I sat. She leaned back slightly, fingers steepled. Outside her window, Manhattan stretched gray and cold under January clouds. "What have you learned from everything since last September?" Diana asked. "Not what have you learned this week. Not how are you adjusting to the analyst role. Everything since last September." My entry twist landed clean. This wasn't about my job performance. The entire mentorship, the strategic check-ins, the careful observations, the measured approval, had been a test of whether I'd internalized wisdom or just weaponized revenge. I considered the question carefully. I could give her a professional answer about corporate governance, about transparency, about strategic risk assessment. But Diana Ashford didn't ask questions she didn't already know the answers to. That people cannot use your humiliation against you if you are not ashamed of it, I said. Diana's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes sharpened with approval. Good, she said. From next week you go by yourself. No more check-ins. No more mentorship. She picked up her tablet again, swiped to a new screen. You have the audit assignment. You know how to document evidence. You know how this company works better than anyone in this building except possibly me. I don't need to hold your hand. She looked up again, held my gaze. You're not a receptionist playing analyst, Audrey. You're an analyst who used to be a receptionist. Learn the difference. I understand. Good. Close the door on your way out. I stood, walked to the door, paused with my hand on the handle. Diana. Yes. Thank you. She nodded once, already reading her tablet again. I closed the door behind me and stood in the hallway for a moment. The silence after her approval felt both freeing and sobering. I'd passed something I hadn't fully understood I was taking. The mentorship was over. The training wheels were off. From here, I either succeeded or failed on my own merits. My first pattern interrupt arrived in that silence, the weight of being released from oversight, of being trusted to work independently after a week of careful observation. It felt like stepping off a ledge and discovering solid ground beneath my feet. I took the elevator down to the 24th floor and returned to my desk at 9:30 a.m. A small black box sat in the center of my workspace. I set my bag down slowly, stared at the box. Matte black tied with a simple gray ribbon. No card visible. I opened it carefully. Inside, folded with precise care, was a charcoal suit. The fabric was beautiful wool, with a subtle texture, professional, but not stiff. I lifted the jacket out. It fit my shoulders exactly when I held it up, not too tight, not borrowed, not aspirational. Made for my frame, my measurements, my body. Beneath the suit, folded just as carefully, was my old receptionist uniform. The navy fabric I'd worn for 2 decades, carried to the cafe to show Chloe, kept in my bag because I couldn't quite let it go yet, but it had been washed, pressed. The collar was crisp, the pleats sharp, the fabric softer than I remembered. Someone had taken it from my bag, from my desk, I didn't know when, and cleaned it with the same care they'd tailored the new suit. My second pattern interrupt crystallized in the physical sensation, holding the old uniform in one hand, the new jacket in the other. Same hands, different weight, different meaning. The old uniform felt like history now, not identity. The new suit felt like permission. I set the uniform down, gently reached into the suit jacket's inside pocket. A folded note, cream cardstock, handwritten in black ink. You earn the right to wear your own size now. No signature, none needed. My exit twist arrived in the realization Diana hadn't just given me a suit. She'd honored both the journey and the destination. The cleaned uniform said, I see where you came from. The tailored suit said, I see where you're going. Together, they said both matter. I sat down at my desk, still holding the note between my fingers, and looked out the window at Manhattan stretching cold and bright below. 25 years ago, I'd walked into this building wearing a uniform that didn't quite fit, carrying a name tag that identified me by function, not achievement. Monday, I would walk in wearing something made for me. Not borrowed, not too big, not someone else's idea of who I should become. Just mine. I folded the note carefully, placed it back in the jacket pocket, and looked out at the city one more time. The city had no idea I was coming. Monday morning arrived in charcoal wool and perfect seams, and I walked through the Manhattan Financial Tower lobby wearing something that had never belonged to anyone else first. The marble felt the same under my shoes. The security guard at the desk glanced up, nodded, looked back down at his screen. Not like I was invisible. Like I belonged. I pressed the elevator button and waited. 36 days ago, December 1st, I'd stood in this exact spot wearing someone else's uniform 2 sizes too large, carrying a name tag that said intern and a bag full of carefully organized lies about my resume. The elevator doors opened. I stepped in. 3 other people followed, 2 men in suits, 1 woman with a leather portfolio. One of them nodded at me. Just a small acknowledgement. Morning. I nodded back. The doors closed. The elevator climbed. 24 floors up the same floor where I'd sat in the intern waiting room 5 weeks ago, looking out at Manhattan and wondering if my plan would work. The doors opened on 24. I stepped out. Two people in the hallway met my eyes and smiled. Not because they knew me, because I looked like someone who worked here. My entry twist landed quietly. 36 days had transformed everything. Same building, same elevator, same 24th floor. But now people saw me. Not through me. Not past me. Just me. I walked to my desk, the same desk Diana had assigned me during that first week of mentorship. I set my bag down, hung my coat on the back of my chair, and looked out the window. Same view. Same city stretching gray and bright under January sky. Completely different. I sat down, logged into my workstation, opened my email. 43 new messages since Friday. Audit assignments, meeting invitations, strategic planning documents Diana wanted my review on. I started reading. At 11 a.m., my desk phone rang. Unknown Manhattan number. I picked up. Audrey, Senior Financial Analyst. Ms. Audrey. A woman's voice, professional, curious. This is Sarah Morrison, Senior Financial Reporter with the Wall Street Journal. I was in the Manhattan Financial Tower lobby on December 22nd when you confronted your parents publicly. I said nothing, waited. I'm writing a piece about the whole situation, Sarah continued. Gregory Reynolds stepping down the evidence that came to light, the family dynamics involved. I'd like to include your perspective if you're willing to comment. What's the title? I asked. The Intern Who Had Nothing and Won Everything. I leaned back in my chair, looked out at Manhattan. What do you want to know? I said. How does it feel? Sarah asked. To have nothing, to be publicly humiliated by your own parents, and then to end up here, senior financial analyst, instrumental in bringing down one of the most powerful CEOs in New York. I thought about that question, really thought about it. My first pattern interrupt arrived in the shape of that question. What does victory actually mean? Is it winning, or is it refusing to carry their shame? Is it power, or is it peace? Just one sentence. I said finally. I didn't win because I was better than anyone. I won because I wasn't ashamed of what they used against me. Silence on the other end. Then Sarah's voice quieter. That's a hell of a quote. It's the only one I have, I said. Thank you, Ms. Audrey. You're welcome. I hung up. I sat at my desk for a moment longer, looking out at the city. My parents' worst weapon had become my greatest story. The uniform they thought would humiliate me into silence had become the narrative that proved I survived. Ironic vindication felt quieter than I'd expected. The week passed in meetings, audit reports, strategic reviews. Diana checked in once on Wednesday, a brief email asking if I needed anything. I responded that I didn't. Friday night, January 10th, I returned to my Bushwick apartment at 7:30 p.m. I made tea I didn't drink. I sat on the couch for 20 minutes without turning on the television. Then I walked to my bedroom closet and opened the small black box Diana had given me. The old receptionist uniform sat folded inside beneath the tissue paper that had wrapped the charcoal suit. I lifted it out carefully. My second pattern interrupt crystallized in the physical sensation. I held the uniform in my hands and felt nothing but fabric. Not shame, not anger, not the weight of 2 decades carried in navy polyester and worn seams. Just cloth. The collar was still crisp from Diana's cleaning. The pleats were still sharp. But it didn't feel like identity anymore. It felt like history. I carried it to the living room, found a small cardboard box in the hall closet, and folded the uniform carefully inside. Not throwing it away, not burning it or burying it or giving it to Chloe, just putting it away. I closed the box, set it on the top shelf of the closet, and turned off all the lights in the apartment. Then I sat on the couch in complete darkness. No laptop open, no recording device running, no evidence to document, no plan to execute, no next move to strategize. Just sitting, just me, just tonight. Outside, Brooklyn hummed with Friday night energy voices on the streetcars passing someone laughing 3 floors down. Inside, silence. I sat in that silence and felt nothing pulling me backward. No past demanding I remember every slight, every humiliation, every moment I'd been invisible. No future demanding I prove anything, achieve anything, become anything other than what I already was. My exit twist arrived like wisdom instead of revelation. My parents thought that old uniform would bury me. They thought if they put me in something too big, something that didn't fit, something that marked me as lesser, I would disappear. They didn't know it was the only thing I needed to finally be seen. The uniform had never been the problem. The shame was. And I'd stopped carrying their shame the moment I stood in that lobby on December 22nd and said it all out loud. I sat in the dark apartment and felt nothing but the present moment. The uniform was in its box. The suit hung in my closet. And I was exactly who I'd become when I stopped apologizing for what I'd survived. No rage left, no plan left, no revenge left. Just peace. Just me. That night, sitting alone in the dark, I thought about something I truly believe: God doesn't waste your pain. Every humiliation, every silent night I planned alone, it was all preparation, not punishment. This is my story of family betrayal, revenge, and I won't pretend I handled everything perfectly. I was cold, calculating. If you're reading family Reddit stories and seeing pieces of your own life, hear me. Don't wait 25 years to stop disappearing. My honest opinion. The cruelest thing a family can do isn't hate you openly. It's make you feel worthless while smiling at the dinner table. I've seen it in countless family Reddit stories, and I've lived it. The bravest response isn't revenge, it's simply refusing to be erased. Stories of family betrayal revenge are never just one person's story. They belong to everyone who has ever been handed someone else's life and told to be grateful for it. If this story touched something in you, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe, because the next story is already waiting for you. Thank you so much for staying until the very end. Some upcoming stories contain fictional elements created for reflection and education. If that's not your preference, feel free to explore other content, no judgment at all.